Hello, sinners. I just wanted to drop in and tell you that My Horror Confessional is now part of the Ghoulish Podcast Network. In addition to producing podcasts, Ghoulish is also a publisher. Ghoulish Books has published dozens of horror books that have gone on to receive award recognition and even film adaptation treatments. Browse their spooky offerings over at ghoulish.rip and use discount code CONFESSIONAL for 10% off your order. And remember, ghouls, live spooky, die spooky. Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to My Horror Confessional, where every week I have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they're properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today, we have a returning guest, Johnny Compton. Johnny is a Stoker Award nominated San Antonio based author whose short stories have appeared in several publications since 2006, including Pseudopod, Strange Horizons, and the No Sleep podcast. His fascination with frightening fiction started when his kindergarten teacher played a record of the classic ghost story, The Golden Arm, for her class. The Spite House, his debut novel, was released in 2023. His second book, Devils Kill Devils, will be released in 2024. Johnny, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. Well,
Yeah,
seemingly at
it
least. Anyway,
feels like it,
yeah.
right? Like you were on maybe about a year and a half ago now. It was for The Hour of the Wolf. Is that what it was called?
Yes. Yeah.
Hour of the Wolf.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Ingmar Bergman movie.
Yeah, another black and white 60s horror movie, which seems to be your vibe based on the movie you chose for today. So um since the last time we talked, I don't even know if your book was out at the time that we talked.
I
But
don't think it was. I think it might have been prior to the Spite House even coming out.
yeah, we talked before it came out. So it came out in 2023. I absolutely loved it. My wife loved it. What's been the response?
To the best of my knowledge, man, really positive, good vibes. I'm glad to hear that. I try not to pay too much attention to reviews or anything, just as part of my own process. But stuff trickles my way, and everything I've heard so far has been. I mean, people don't really approach with bad news. So for all I know, there's a whole legion of people out there who hate the Spite House, and my agent and nobody's gonna come up and tell me. And our mutual friend Max isn't gonna be like, "Oh man, I mean, Max actually might. Max is the kind of
Max
guy.
might do it. Yeah.
Max actually might just for a quick laugh. Like, hey, by the way, have you read about this Spite House hate group? There's a whole group on Facebook.
I was gonna say it was in his Discord.
I was gonna say, like, now that I've thrown that out there, he's gonna be at least tempted to just as a joke if he hears this, be like, I might just make that. What the hell? Why not? But
Yeah,
yeah, no, man, everything's been good vibes, man. Really positive. So I'm excited about it.
yeah. I'm glad, really glad to hear about it. He's your local San Antonio artist, author, and it's your first, debut novel, and seems to be going great. And then so obviously it looks like it's going so good that you're working on a new book coming out in this year, actually, right?
Yeah. Yeah, September of this year is where we're currently slated. So, um,
Nice.
extraordinarily excited about that as well. It's a pretty big change of pace from the Spite House. So I'm curious to see how it's received. It's a little bloodier, gorier,
Nice.
more intense, I think. Which I know is gonna, that fits your vibe in some respects. So we'll see how everybody kind of receives it, but I'm extremely excited about it. I think this is a pretty cool story that I wrote here.
You want to tell, is there anything you could tell us about it?
Sure. It without giving away too much, although like some of the promotional elements have already started based on some of the labeling with the book in terms of where it's at on the publisher site. Already gives away some things which are not huge twists, but the nature of the evil, I'm not going to get into that. However, it's called Devils Kill Devils. It is a story about a woman named Sarita who, on her wedding night, in the midst of marital bliss in the honeymoon suite, she has a guardian angel who has followed her entire life, saved her life multiple times. And on her wedding night, that guardian angel shows up and beats her husband to death right in front of her and then leaves. And so that is the opening chapter of the book.
Oh
And
shit.
then we
Okay.
spend the yeah. And then we spend the rest of the book with her and with some of the forces of evil, with the grieving mother of the husband who was murdered as well, and trying to figure out what actually is controlling and influencing Sarita's life, which is obviously not necessarily angelic and is clearly saving her for something that maybe she doesn't want to be a part of.
That sounds like a lot of fun, man. I can't wait to read that. So I had a question for you. So your debut novel, Spite House comes out. I'm assuming is it the same publisher? Is your
Yes.
okay? So I'm assuming your publisher really loved it because they, signed you up for this next book. Did you already have an idea of this next book that you wanted to write, or did you go through a couple iterations of some other things?
I did have an idea for this. This was always my backup plan to a certain degree. If the Spite House didn't land an agent, land a publisher, whatever, I had a lot of faith in this story to be maybe the one, because I feel like the opening chapter kind of grabs you in the concept of my guardian angel turned on me. Turns out it's not really a guardian angel. I felt like that whole concept maybe could work. So I had that in mind already. I had the plot, generally what I knew was going to happen, what the motivation was, what the real revelations are. I had all of that in mind. I did have to kind of start over at a certain point after going through the process of um, basically learning what it's like to write a novel at a professional level, not an aspiring author level, I guess, for lack of a better term. And it's not a blanket statement in terms of aspiring. You might be an aspiring author who knocks it out of the park immediately. I don't know. I know for me, I learned that some of the things that maybe I was trying to do with the Spite House might not work, especially with a larger, more traditional publisher and the expectations of the audience, etc. So I started over and started rewriting it. Devils Kill Devils, even though I was a certain amount of it already into it before I'd even sold the Spite House. But I knew that I needed to go back and kind of reset certain things and refocus um, some of the storyline to be more about certain characters and get rid of certain side characters that are just there for my own personal indulgences, but maybe not as important to the story and maybe not something that the average reader is probably going to care about. And so just learning to navigate that process, it's kind of how it all came together there.
So I like the idea of like having something for you in the story and not so much for the writer or for the reader. I'm sorry. Is there anything that you were able to keep in the story that's just for you,
Oh man,
either in this one or in the Spite House?
great question. It's one of those things where the stuff that you end up keeping that you think is just for you, at least for me in my experience here so far, that I've kept that I thought this is just for me. I don't know how much other people are going to connect to it, at least with my editors and other people that read it. Um, the stuff that ended up being kept that I thought was just for me is also some of the stuff that in the editorial notes they were like, I love this so much.
Oh yeah,
This is
that's
amazing.
awesome.
This is gonna like be incredible. And I was like, oh man, I thought this was just my own little weird um point of view on this. So I think maybe there's like there are some like references to things like the Spite House has a very quick small reference to one of my favorite books, which is The Elementals, written by Michael McDowell. And so it takes
Mm,
place, but that book takes place in a fictional um, coastal community in Alabama called Beldame that does not really exist. So I make a reference to that in the Spite House. That's just one of those little, just for me kind of things. It's a small one, but it's there.
yeah.
Um, Devils Kill Devils has a reference to an anime that I can't name, but because it'll maybe spoil certain things. But it has a direct reference to an anime that I've really enjoyed, an anime film that I remember really enjoying since I was younger. And even um a really pivotal scene in the book is basically my version of writing probably my favorite scene from that anime. And so I don't know if that's, we can, when the book comes out, we might
Yeah,
just
yeah.
revisit that or something, and spill the beans on some of that, because I'd love to talk about I can't wait to talk about that a little bit more once the book comes out, and it's not so much about the spoilers, because I love to nerd out on stupid stuff like that.
I
But that's also just for
fucking
me.
knew. I knew you're a weeb. I knew it. Once I looked at you, I was like, this guy is trying to hide it, but he's a fucking weeb. And you come to my show and you start talking about anime, how fucking dare you? No, that's cool. I
Oh
got
god.
there's some horror anime that people have been telling me. Like I'm into manga, like I'm into horror manga
Mhm.
specifically, but not so much anime. There's like this weird thing of like black dudes and nerdy white kids. They like fucking meet up. It's like Arnold
Dude,
Schwarzenegger
it's
and Carl Weathers.
yes.
That just like with their love of anime. I don't get it, but I love it.
It's and it's I'm an older dude too, so anime actually is blowing up a lot more since I was a lot more into it when I was younger.
Yeah.
I'm also, we've talked about this. I don't really watch a lot of television or series stuff. So my love of anime is a lot of anime film, feature film kind of stuff.
Okay.
I've never been able to get into a series. Like I can't there's one series that also gets referenced or mentioned at least in the book, but even that, um I've seen like a season of it, and or like not I don't even think I've finished the full season, because I'm just not a series watcher, and anime is notorious for not just having like a season, but like the episodes themselves, a moment will drag on, and they're kind of slow moving with the scene. And I'm not knocking it. That's the style of it. I know people enjoy that. They love it. That's what you're signing up for. It's just not something I can really get with. So like I would try when I was younger to get into like even Dragon Ball. And I'd be like, this, I can't believe this fight scene is like 4 episodes long. Like, I
Look at
just,
him. He's backing off. He's backing off the anime love. I see.
I'm much more of a, like
Horror film.
Miyazaki, Satoshi Kon.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever seen Perfect Blue. We got to get you some recommendations.
Well, here's the thing. What I wanted to talk about is this is perfect for the Sunday school sessions, which is
Mhm.
the Patreon exclusive after show that I do with all my guests. So let's hold off for that. But so while we're talking, you can think about perhaps your favorite anime films, and we can talk about it then.
Awesome.
All right. So but real quick, could two things. First, can you tell people what the Spite House is about? Since technically, I mean,
Spite
it just
House.
came out last year. They should go pick it up.
Well, yeah, and the paperback just came out too in March here. So
Nice.
if you're waiting, if you're holding out for the less expensive option, the more affordable option, you got that now. Um, Spite House is a haunted house story set in the Texas Hill Country. It's about a father on the run with his daughters. We don't know why, but he's desperate for money. He finds an ad in a newspaper asking someone to stay in a very haunted house that is a spite house, which is a real world phenomenon where somebody builds a house literally just to spite somebody else, to block their view, to block some level of construction, to otherwise annoy, disrupt, and register their hatred to the world. And so he stays in this spite house in the Texas Hill Country, and quickly discovers that it is indeed quite haunted. And the nature of the haunting is maybe a little bit more overwhelming than he was anticipating. And as the story goes along, we find out what secrets he's been holding on to, the person who owns the house, what secrets they've been holding on to, the background of the house. It all eventually culminates in a horrifying, I think, ending.
It was a ton of fun to read. I like breezed through it real quickly. Um, and so then my next question is, well, first of all, I'll just say everybody pick it up and then look out for the Devils Kill Devils coming out this later this year in September. If you could let everybody know how they could support you, how they can follow you, where they can buy your book, all that stuff.
Oh man, buy my book, preferably at your local bookshop. You can buy it anywhere, but if you got a
Foolish
local
Books
favorite bookstore,
in San
Ghoulish
Antonio.
Books in San Antonio, Texas is wonderful. If you want to go online, order it from there. I believe there's an order process that you can do. If it's not in, same where whatever your location may be, um, if you've got like if it's not in stock literally right there, you can order it online. I'm sure through them, and it will get sent to you. You can go to the bigger retailers. Obviously, it's present there. with the rainforest one that shall not be named necessarily, but that's there. Barnes and Noble, I've still got some love for, so I'll go ahead and shout them out too. Bookshop.org, I believe, has a really good resource like online if you're looking for just wherever you want to shop through to find its availability. It's out there.
And for bookshop.org, the cool thing I like about them is that you can name your
Hmm.
favorite bookstore and then they like set it up and they'll get a percentage of the book that you buy, which is cool. I did have Ghoulish. Something happened. They're not on there anymore. So Max has to fix that. But so then there's a black owned bookstore in Austin called Black Pearl Books, and I chose them as my bookshop.org bookstore. So first of all, I'm going there or Ghoulish to see if I can buy them directly from them. But any books that I can't find directly from them, then I will order off bookshop.org and put them as my shop so that they get kickback.
It's awesome. That's
Yeah.
perfect. I mean, I've been dying to go to
Black
Black
Pearl.
Pearl,
It's
and
really cool. Yeah, it's cool in there.
yeah, every time I go to Austin. I think they're closed on Mondays, and I always forget. And then for whatever reason, I keep going to Austin on a Monday, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna stop by Black Pearl, and it's closed. And I'm like, oh
Next
yeah,
time you're
yeah.
up, let me know. We'll head up there. There obviously if it's not a Monday, but there it's like an old it's on the north side and it's an old house converted into a bookshop. It's kind of cool. So it's small, so they don't have the best selection, but they have a really eclectic selection, which is great.
Perfect.
But how about your socials?
Socials, it's all Compton Writes at Compton Writes on any of the socials that um are relevant these days, I guess. I'm most prevalent on Instagram. I'm not a huge social media person, as you know. But I'm pretty present on Instagram compared to the others. But if you're on Blue Sky, you can follow me there. If you're on Threads, you can follow me there. Twitter, wherever else. I TikTok. I'm again a lot of these. I'm not as present probably as I should be for marketing purposes, etc. But social media is not something I'm super duper into. And then my website is just johnnycompton.com. So if you're not remembering where to go to find me, if you go to the website, the links to the social media accounts that I use most frequently are on there as well.
Nice, and we'll put all the links in the show notes as well. One question I wanted to ask you is we've talked recently about a project that you're working on. Is that anything that you want to discuss at this point, or is it too preliminary?
You're talking about the like the short film project.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still super preliminary, but I don't mind talking about it. I am
Okay.
hopefully going to be able to. Me and my good friend who goes under the I don't know if I'm allowed to use his real name, so I'm going to say the he's under the Instagram label. It's Christopher Tracy, which I believe is a Prince reference. I think that's the name of a Prince character in some movie. I want to say like under the he's a very big Prince fan, so it makes sense. And I feel embarrassed because I should know this because I like to think of myself as a pretty decent Prince fan, but I wasn't like watching the movies and stuff. He's like that far. Anyway, um, we went to the place that we were scouting for filming. Really had a great time, kind of blocking it out, getting a master plan for it. But in the process, I talked to you. I think we were going to look at maybe doing kind of more guerrilla style filming,
Yeah.
and then as we kind of did it a little bit that way, but then and this whole initial endeavor was just to kind of plan out scenes before we reach out to try to hire some actors and follow through on these kind of things. And I discovered that the guerrilla filming is probably not going to be adequate. So fortunately, I have a contact for the site that we want to film at who um, I've reached out. They have not got back to me yet. I'm anticipating it might take a little time, but hopefully they'll get back to me and give us official permission. I've heard that it's doable. It's not like some long shot thing. It just takes a little while maybe, and they have to vet certain things. And I don't think we'll be doing anything that's going to present an issue for them, but we'll see how it goes. Fingers crossed, because I really like to get the permission because that's going to make it a way easier to actually and way better for the overall project. I think if we can actually do it on the up and up instead of having to surreptitiously try to do this, which guerrilla filmmaking is a real thing, and some people make the best of it. I'm not good at being sneaky, so it probably doesn't help me in that aspect. Is my
Yeah.
my sneak trait. If you're like building up the character in like a video game, and it's like the stealth trait, like
Yeah.
you can go from 0 to 99. Mine's like a 45. So
All right. Okay.
yeah,
Well, that's cool. I can't wait. Yeah, when you were telling me about that, like I was really excited about that. And I always love to see people creating. Like you're obviously the creative type, you're an author, but you have like other shits that you like to work on as well. And I love to see that. So I can't wait. Hopefully, it goes through and everything works out. If there's anything I can do to help out, please let me know. But yeah, I'm really excited for that.
of course, man. I'm definitely
Yeah.
going to be reaching out to you, man. We can use I think we're going to be able to use some additional crew, some
Uh,
additional eyes on the project to make sure that we're we're
No,
doing
no,
things the right way and things
I
look
meant
good.
like a romantic leading man is what I meant.
Oh well, there you go. I mean, well, I've told you what the story entails, so
Yeah.
we'd have to shoehorn a random romantic moment,
All
just
right.
non sequitur like romantic scene,
Just shoot
just
to
to
me
get
making
Miguel
out
involved.
with somebody. That's all I'm saying. That's
Yeah,
all.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like has nothing to do with the rest of the story.
Yeah. All right. So Johnny is here today to confess his horror sin of never having watched A Taste of Fear from 1961, or it's just Taste of Fear, but also it's known as Scream of Fear in the United States. So I have a feeling that a lot of people haven't heard of this movie. This is a Hammer horror movie, but how did this particular movie pass you by? Is this one that you hadn't heard of before, or you're a big horror Hammer horror guy?
I so this has passed me by, and I'm even more embarrassed about this one than the last one because I hadn't even heard of it before, and then I saw it on your list, started looking it up. It's a Hammer horror movie, and I like to think I'm pretty into Hammer horror. There's a YouTube channel that I follow that does a really good that has a good Hammer breakdown of several different films that he enjoys. The YouTubers called it's called Dark Corners Reviews, and it's this British guy, and he normally does like bad movie reviews, kind of jokey stuff, but he does some of these really thoughtful, deep dive retrospectives as well. And he's done a whole breakdown of the entire Hammer Dracula um, series, Hammer Frankenstein. He just released one about Hammer's Mummy series, and so then there's
Nice.
also all of these other Hammer horror movies as well that are not related necessarily to the big franchises that are really cool and really fun. I've watched a lot of those. I love them, and I also watched this. We saw this, or at least I saw it on Tubi.
Yeah.
And like you said, this is kind of my thing. It really is. Like if I can't think of anything else to watch, I'll just throw on Tubi, look for like black and white horror, and just kind of let it run. And like I'll find one title, something old, and if it looks halfway interesting, I'll watch it all the way through, and then the recommendations, and I'll just like let it run like a playlist curated by Tubi itself. And so it surprised me that I haven't even come across this that way yet,
Yeah.
because I feel like I thought I had like almost exhausted every like pretty good black and white horror thriller on Tubi by that method, because I've been doing that for like over a year now. I feel like that's like my go-to. Like I say, if I can't think of anything else, and somehow this slipped by me. And then I went and read the Wikipedia enough to just kind of get some sense of the history. And Christopher Lee, who's just a bit player in this, but he says this is one of his favorite Hammer movies that he did. And I was like, what the hell am I missing out on? And we'll talk about it in a second, get our thoughts on it. So I'm not going to spoil it. But I'm glad. I'll say this: I'm glad I watched it.
Yeah. And I actually like we had the same thought. I had the quote here. It says, "This was the best film that I was in that Hammer ever made. It had the best director, the best cast, and the best story." So yeah, you're right. Like this is one of the movies that he really loved, that he made the best. And he was in The Ring. I mean, not The Ring, sorry. He was in Lord of the
Lord of the
Rings.
Rings.
Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Christopher Lee in The Ring would have been dope. But
You could have worked in the ring somehow.
yeah. And I mean the original Japanese version, not the
Yeah,
remake.
he
He would have been in it
just saw
somehow.
this random British guy.
Yeah. But I'm kind of with you on that. Like, so I don't consider myself a Hammer horror dude, just because I'm not the biggest gothic horror fan when it comes to
Mm.
like Dracula's or just like vampires. It's not my favorite. There is some stuff that I really, really love, but for the most part, Hammer hasn't really impressed me a lot. But I've noticed this is maybe the third Hammer film I've seen that isn't gothic, and it's just a straight up not it's not a period piece, it's just a horror film that I really enjoy. So I think that that
Mhm.
might be something for me that to look further into because and even with the Universal stuff, I'm not the biggest fan of gothic horror movies either. Like I mean, I understand that Dracula's important, Frankenstein's important, and it's great. And like, well, Bride of Frankenstein, I have my own issue with. But I mean, have you seen the Bride of Frankenstein?
I don't think I have actually,
Okay,
but
I
I've heard
won't.
that people say that that's supposed to be the best one of the Universal Frankenstein. So that's interesting.
Okay,
I
it's
can't
been
wait to
out
hear your
for
take.
over
Well,
100 years, so but I don't want to give people spoilers. So after you see it, we'll talk.
yeah,
But yeah, all that to say that I think I'm really digging Hammer horror outside of the Gothic horror. So I'm going to start exploring that a little bit more for me. But
like
good.
I mean, like you're saying like supernatural gothic because this movie has like gothic atmosphere, but not like you're talking about like kind of the more like it's not set in a literal castle.
Exactly. It's not set in
You
a
know what I mean? It's
castle. There's no
right,
village people who are chasing you down. There's no like,
right, right.
you know, that sort of thing.
It's
Um,
not like old school village. Like yeah, you're right. Like it's got like some visual atmosphere trappings of it, but it's much more in the vein of like what they used to call the old dark house movies, which is like kind of its own thing. It's like an actual house. It's big. There's something weird going on. You can't really trust anybody. That kind of vibe of like a more modernist gothic take on it that was like
yeah,
that came into its own around that time, but not like you said, like the vintage um you know damsel in a dress or like kind of swooning people with like flowing capes for the men and stuff like that, and like the old school true original gothic kind of a like I say castles and
yeah.
torches and pitchforks kind of thing.
Well, just as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, but I love when the Italians do it. I
I
love it.
love when the Italians do it.
I love it when Baba does it. I
Yeah,
love Black Sabbath and Black Sunday and all that sort of stuff. So that I don't have a problem with. It's more like specifically Hammer horror. I really
it's the
fucking hate
Brits.
Hammer horror. Yeah, no.
It's the Brits, man. And I'll say this because again I've watched a lot of the Hammer horror movies. It's real hit or miss. I mean, I've also watched Hammer used to do a horror series, like a short lived TV
Yeah.
series in that British fashion where it's like one season I think, and there's like 8 episodes or something like that. But I've seen all those episodes. It's super duper hit or miss. Um, and I do think, like you said, like the way the Italians do it and Bava, I think there's something about like especially a guy like Bava and the Italian sensibilities and even some of the Spanish ones I've seen. There's like a whole series called Tombs of the Blind Dead. I think that I'm really into people just committing to the process. And I
Mm.
think not to stereotype too much, but British sensibilities, traditionally there's reason why we joke about their food being bland and stuff. I think it's a lot more reserved in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and the Italians are a lot more. There's a reason why it's like known for like their food being like very zesty and over the top and all the wonderful flavors. They're using everything, and Bava's style I think matches that when it comes to the Gothic. The black and white films are just even more saturated with the shadows and stuff and the contrasts. And then when he does it with the color films, like one of
It's a
my favorite movies of his, one of my favorite movies period, is called Kill Baby Kill, and it is a gothic, very drenched in gothic atmosphere and the villagers and the period piece and all that kind of stuff, but the colors it's in color and it's just really vivid and really goes for everything it's going for. And I'm a big fan of just committing to and seeing things through to the fullest extent. And I do feel like there's a kind of washed out vibe in a lot of even some of the stuff I like from Hammer. There's this weird sometimes kind of a subdued nature to some of the horror and some of the things going on in the ones that I think don't work. And the ones where it works, I feel like that's where it very clearly looks like they had a director, they had a writer, they had a team that really just wanted to go fully into what it is that they were trying to do.
yeah, for me it's a difference between like dry wheat toast and like bruschetta. You know?
Yeah, it's oh my god, I'm stealing that. That is perfect. That is brilliant. Because you're
Yeah.
right. Like this is like bread, uh, kind of toasted, overdone a little bit. But one is clearly amazing, and the other one is like what you feed prisoners.
Yeah. Or when
Like
your tummy's hurting, you just have some dry toast, you know?
yeah. Like grandma would just be like, "Look, you got an upset stomach. This is literally the whole purpose of this is just to absorb whatever illness I think is happening inside your stomach." Bruschetta's got like a flair. It's got a flavor to it. It's way better.
Yeah, they're both going to nourish you, but you're gonna have a hell of a lot more fun with bruschetta, you know?
Yeah,
So
you're gonna ask for like a little more of the bruschetta. You're not gonna
yeah,
be like, "Hey, can I get more of the dry wheat toast?"
yeah. Yeah. So okay, so enough for me shitting on Hammer. But let's talk a little bit about who directed. So this was directed by Seth Holt. And I wasn't really familiar too much with Seth Holt, but I had seen The Lady Killers, which is what he made it. And he did The Nanny, which was starring Betty Davis, and Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. And I saw The Lady Killers, the original version. I saw it after the not Tom
Tom
Hanks version,
Hanks.
Tom Hanks
Yeah,
version. And which one of the Wayans brothers was in it? Was it Marlon Wayans?
Marlin, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Marlon. The reason why I saw The Lady Killers was because of Marlon Wayans. So I saw that, and then I was like, oh, I was looking it up. I'm like, oh, there was an original one. So I saw the original one, and I really enjoyed that one. Have you seen either one of either versions?
I've seen the remake.
Okay.
I was aware of the original, and I think I've seen little bits and pieces of it. But it's like one of those that's on my list of I got to get to this one day, and I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, it's
But I've
it's
heard
it's
good
fun.
things about the original. I've heard that it's pretty fun. It's a little like from what I've read about it, at least a little maybe a little quirkier.
Yeah,
In a like maybe a I don't know. I felt like the newer Lady Killers. I think it's a Coen Brothers movie or one of the Coens,
might
maybe
be. Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah.
something like that. It kind of they have a very distinct style and sense of humor, and I felt like it kind of didn't completely work or match up well with the Lady Killers. And so
Yeah,
I've
I kind
heard
of
that the
agree.
original version kind of fits the tone with the comedy and the dark comedy element with the story fits it a little bit better than maybe that Coen Brothers style of which is a tough balance even for them to do. I love a lot of the Coen Brothers movies. And they can do dark comedy extremely well, but I felt like that one just wasn't they kind of couldn't go as dark as they normally would with their dark comedy, and so that maybe didn't suit to didn't play to their strength as well
Yeah,
as
it's
it
it's not in their
otherwise
top
would.
five for sure. It's not in the top five.
No, I don't think it's gonna go in their pantheon when they get inducted or they get their uh Oscar
Star.
their lifetime achievement award or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. A screenplay by Jimmy Sangster, who was a big Hammer horror dude.
Hmm.
He did Horror of Dracula, The Horror of Frankenstein. He did Maniac. So I'm sure you've seen some of his movies before, being a big Hammer horror dude.
Yeah.
Um, the
And like you said,
cast.
he's like no, you just he's like one of the go-tos. He was kind of their workhorse a little bit when it came to like screenplays and even I think he did a little bit of directing for them too. And
I saw that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it kind of surprised me when I saw that he was a big Hammer horror dude, and that he did like the kind of movies I don't typically like. Because I was like, oh, I really, it was kind of opposite for me of this one. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. But the cast is Susan Strasberg as Penny Appleby. She was in a couple other bunch of other movies, but the one she's most known for, I hadn't heard of, but Picnic, Capo, and Roller Coaster. But I really enjoyed her work here. I'm surprised that she
Yeah.
wasn't. Maybe she was bigger in England, but I'm just surprised that I haven't really heard of her since then because I thought she did a really good job here.
Yeah, I thought she was fantastic. She basically carries the movie. Um I've seen Roller Coaster, which is a old school 70s, I believe, disaster movie when they were just trying to
Oh,
do
okay.
any kind
Those,
of weird disaster. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I know I've seen it, but it's been ages. If I'm not mistaken, it's like a basically a terrorist threatens to blow up a roller coaster or something like that. It's pretty like weird as a concept to like be like we're gonna try to set an entire disaster thriller on a roller coaster.
Yeah,
But more power to them for trying it out. You got to do what you got to do, I guess. If you got the if you got the idea.
yeah, that's
And
funny.
so I was reading up on her IMDb as well, and she did. I can't think of the names of them, but she did a lot of like lower budget, a little more obscure horror movies apparently as well. She was in a fair number of movies that were especially getting later into her career, they kind of like I think maybe some of this early work with Hammer, she met with people that worked in horror, and when she needs work, maybe a little later in her career, it's like we got a horror, we got a thriller, we're doing. She's reliable. We know she'll show up. She's professional. She'll be on the job. Um, let's bring her in. So kind of an underrated this happens from time to time. I'll notice this, like they'll be like these underappreciated sort of early proto scream queens
Yeah,
that did a lot of like made for TV horror movies and stuff like that. Um, my favorite of that is Shelley Winters, who's like way more famous for being in like the Poseidon Adventure as the more heavyset woman, but she's a fantastic swimmer. And I remember the first time I saw the Poseidon Adventure, and it broke my heart when she actually what happens to her. I guess no spoiler alert for the original Poseidon Adventure that came out in like 72 or something.
yeah.
But later on, I realized she was in she's in one of my favorite movies of all time, Night of the Hunter, and she's
Love
terrific
that
in
movie
that.
so much. Have you heard that they're
It,
doing a remake or they're trying to do a
yes,
remake?
I heard. I'm reserving judgment because it is based on a book,
Yeah,
and so I
yeah,
always kind of feel like it's one thing to remake a classic movie. It's another thing to, even if there's a well regarded original uh, adaptation. If you're adapting the story to more modern times, who knows? I mean, I always remind myself one of my favorite movies is John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a, a second adaptation of Who Goes There. Was originally adapted as The Thing from Another World, which was very well received at the time. So, and still is a really good movie. So I
Do you
always
know
try
who
to
I
remember.
did? Sorry to interrupt you. Do you know who I
No, go
did
ahead. Go ahead.
the Night of the Hunter with? Cynthia Pelayo.
Who? Really? Was
Yeah.
that recent?
No, it was like within the first year of me doing it. So it was
Okay, okay,
probably like
okay.
in 2021 or 2022 or something like that. But
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
It's awesome, man. Well, shout out to Cynthia. I'm glad she got to see it then, because it's a wonderful movie. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Don't quote me on that. Now I'm thinking, fuck, did I? But I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. Um,
oh,
but
but
I was thinking about the Night of the Hunter, and I was, how they're remaking The Crow. Have you seen like the how The Crow looks now? Like with
I haven't
the
seen the.
okay. So
I
there's
got to
an
look it up. I know Skarsgård's doing it, right? It's
he,
Skarsgård, I think.
I think so, but so they made him up to look kind of like the Joker that everybody hates from the Suicide Squad.
Oh God. Okay. Oh
And
no.
I said because they're trying to make the Night of the Hunter scarier and more like edgy. So it's like, okay, so somebody needs to make a meme of Robert Mitchum with the makeup from the new Crow. But I don't
Oh
know
no.
enough Photoshop to do it, but yeah.
No, me neither. But that sounds hilarious. But that also is slightly worrying. But what are you
Yeah.
gonna do?
So but you were talking about Shelley Winters.
Yeah, yeah. Shelley Winters. She's another one, kind of like we mentioned the actress here, Susan Strasberg, I believe is her
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Um, and so like Shelley Winters is another one who you look through her IMDb. She did a ton at like a different later stage of her career. She did a ton of horror movies and a ton of made for TV stuff, and she was like just like a reliable go to. Hey, we need a mysterious older woman, somebody who's maybe leading a witches coven, all these kind of little weird things. She was like the go-to for this for a while. So I'm wondering if Susan's career kind of took that path as well, maybe as she, got to a certain stage of her career. And these are reliable, probably pretty pay pretty well, and at the same time you're not on the set for like maybe several months at a time. You get in, you get out, get a paycheck.
Yeah.
Hey, be a professional. This is part of the gig sometimes.
Hey, if she can make a living. But I know like I think she passed away at an early age. I think like around 60 or something.
Yeah, she was about 60 years old from what I saw too. Yeah, that when
Yeah.
she passed away. So that's unfortunate. There's a few different people on here that had some some interesting circumstances, I'll say, in their lives
Speaking
when
of,
I looked it up.
yeah, speaking
Yeah.
of, we have Ronald Lewis as Robert. He was in Helen of Troy, Storm Over the Nile, and Billy Budd, and he met an untimely death or an early-ish death anyway. He I think committed suicide via like
Yes.
medicine or something like that. So or painkillers or whatever the case may be, which is too bad. But I think again, Ronald Lewis as Robert, really good job in this.
Great job. A great freaking look. Like his face. He almost looks like, to me, like young, you've seen young Jack Palance. Like Jack Palance's face is like one of a kind. So it's not
Before
on that
Curly,
level really.
this is
Yeah,
before.
before it's young Jack Palance looks like a freaking, like he came out of a machine, where somebody's like, we need an actor who looks permanently intense, and if he smiles, you immediately don't trust him. It's phenomenal. And Ronald Lewis kind of like a lesser version of that, but kind of gave me that energy throughout the movie of like, man, this guy's got like this very like the shape of his face and everything is like, I can get why the ladies would go for him, but there's also something kind of mysterious and unsettling here. And like
Yeah,
he's got this immediate role. The first time we meet him in the movie, he's like the guy who's giving out information that feels like it's like, wait, why is he being so like kind of a discreet about certain things that seem like really critical and important to this young woman who's come back to her family home for the first time in years.
yeah,
It's very, I don't know, it's very strange. And then you find out, as the story goes along, you're seeing which sides he's choosing as things progress.
yeah. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed his role. Then we have Ann Todd as Jane Appleby. She was Gay Keen in Alfred Hitchcock's The Paradigm Case, which is a Hitchcock that I haven't seen. I think it was like 48 or something like that.
Okay,
She
yeah.
was also in The Passionate Friends and The Sound Barrier. But I wanted to get to, and I thought that Ann Todd did a really good job here as
Mm.
well. But I wanted to get to the person you mentioned earlier, which was Christopher Lee as Dr. Gerard. And so Sir Christopher Frank Carandini Lee, born 1922 through 2015, was an English actor and singer. In a long career which spanned over 60 years, Lee was known as an actor with a deep and commanding voice who often portrayed villains in horror and franchise films. Lee was knighted for services to drama and charity in 2009. He gained notoriety for portraying Count Dracula in 7 Hammer horror films. His other film roles include Francisco Scaramanga in the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun. He played Count Dooku in the later Star Wars films. I'm going to assume that's how you say it. Is it Count
I
Dooku?
believe that was correct. Yes, I
Okay.
believe that's correct.
And the role that I think he's world famous for at this point is Saruman in both the Lord of the Rings trilogy and also the Hobbit film trilogy. He frequently appeared opposite his friend Peter Cushing in horror films, and late in his career had roles in 5 of Tim Burton's films, including Sleepy Hollow, Corpse Bride, Charlie and Chocolate Factory, Alice in Wonderland, and Dark Shadows. Lee's other notable roles include The Curse of Frankenstein, The Wicker Man, and of course, Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
one thing I wanted to I wanted to go deep dive in him, but we just don't have enough time. But you guys should look up the fact that Christopher Lee had a career in heavy metal,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
wild. I want to look up. He had albums. He was featured on songs. So yeah, apparently he was a heavy metal fan, which
And
is
this was
cool.
like way later in his career.
Oh yeah, or I
Like
think
he was
he
like
had
way older by that time.
yeah, I think he was is the oldest person to have a top 20. And I think he was in his 90s or something like that. It's
That's
wild.
wild.
Yeah, it's
That
wild.
is wild.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started talking about Taste of Fear. So the movie starts, we get that old Columbia Pictures lady with the statue, which is always great to see.
Yeah.
You know you're in good for a good time. There's one, oh man, I think it's a Betty Davis or Joan. What's the Betty Davis and
Joan
Joan?
Crawford.
Joan, I think it's a Joan Crawford film, where the movie starts with the that statuette, but the head is gone because in the movie she
Oh,
plays a hatchet wielding maniac. Oh man, I can't remember. I did the movie, so that's funny. But anyway, I always love to see this Columbia Pictures intro here. So it's black and white, and we're looking at a lake. It's beautiful scenery with huge ice-capped mountains in the background. And I
it's
thought,
gorgeous.
well, yeah, but I was like, that background has to be a matte painting
It
because
I couldn't tell. I ran it back a few different times and I was like, this is almost too perfect.
it was huge. Like they would have, I don't, they would have to be some of the biggest mountains in the world. But I know they were in France, or maybe they were in Italy. So what's the
Is
Alps?
it
Maybe it's
I
the
was gonna say, is
Alps.
it the Alps?
Yeah.
Something,
So,
yeah.
but it looked idyllic for me. Then we see that there's people in rowboats. There's a sound of wildlife all around us. And then we see that these aren't normal people in the rowboats. They're actually police officers. And some are in the boat and some are on shore, and they're kind of talking back and forth to each other. And they seem to be dragging the lake looking for something or someone. Now we're in the rowboat now, and one fisherman speaks to a police officer in German. They make no, it doesn't matter what they say. They don't give us the subtitles.
No
That's fine.
subtitles on that.
Yeah,
No.
they're like, you don't need to know. It's not pertinent to the movie at all. And the officer seems to locate something in the water and grunts at the fisherman to help him. The fisherman carefully walks over and helps the officer bring to the surface what appears to be a human body. As it gets closer to the surface, we see that it is in fact the body of a woman in a now can't speak. It is in fact the body of a woman in a nightgown. With great effort, they manage to pull her onto the boat and lay her lifeless body on the floor. The orchestral music ramps up, and we get the title of the movie, Scream of Fear, as they cover the corpse. The men pilot the boat to shore with the picturesque background, drawing a stark contrast to the horror that we've just witnessed. So, what did you think about this intro scene?
I thought it was like beautiful and like I was really fascinated with the just immediately. I was like, there's obviously the immediate entry. We've fished out a body. I deliberately tried not to read too much of the plot ahead of the movie. So I was like, is this a murder situation? Are we going to be like on the search for a killer? And so I was just intrigued by all of that. And like you said, it has this good contrast of the beautiful idyllic setting, and then you're fishing a body out of this lake that's supposed to be like, looks like paradise, looks like a vacation. Rich people probably go here and ski and hang out in the water and do whatever it is that people did in the 50s and 60s on the lake. And instead there's a body in here, and it's immediately setting the tone, which I really liked, that it goes right forward right away.
Yeah, and the cinematography here was great. Just the juxtaposition of like them in the foreground with the body rolling to shore, and then in the background we see these beautiful ice-capped mountains. Like it's wonderful. And there's at this point the, there's not a lot of music. There's no music at this particular point up until like the one where it comes in with the title. And so when music is it's used sparingly, but when it's used really well.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really liked. Whereas, like, I saw at Terror Tuesday last night, I saw Resident Evil for the first time in a long time. And don't get me wrong, I love Resident Evil, but it's literally like from the beginning to the end, the soundtrack is just there's always music, and it's always
Yeah.
like new metal or like just that
Yeah.
thumping bass, dun, 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 which is cool. But it's just like sometimes silence does a lot more than music. There's that anticipation of what you expect happening and all that sort of stuff. So I really appreciated that in Taste of Fear.
For sure.
So later, we see an airplane landing at a French airport, and a chauffeur named Robert has arrived to pick up his passenger, Miss Appleby, who is his boss's daughter. He informs her that her father couldn't be there. So Penny Appleby is in a wheelchair, and Robert leads her to the car as she says goodbye in French to the flight attendant who's helping her. One thing I wanted to mention, and I should have looked this up and I apologize. Um, they use a lot of derogatory, they use one specific derogatory term for
Oh yeah.
people in wheelchairs. And when I'm quoting it, I'll say it, but I try not to. But the other thing is, as far as you're aware, Johnny, I'm gonna put this on you. If I get it wrong, it's on Johnny's fault. No, it's on my fault. But like handicapped, is it still the correct term to use? Do you
See,
know?
I've heard it kind of, I think it's come back around. Like for a while I know that was kind of not the term. I know like differently abled is a pretty neutral term, but I think some people have also seen that as maybe like not kind of dancing around the fact that there's a hardship here that we need to um acknowledge so that we can provide proper assistance to people who need extra assistance because of a circumstance and situation they're in. So I don't know if there has really been a truly solidified, as somebody who's not part of that community and not, steeped in exactly what they know. I haven't seen anything that is definitive. So, we've talked about this before where I think we're two earnest, sincere guys trying. So I don't think anybody's going to, people that know us have been around us. Um, I think they're going to give us the benefit of the doubt that we are acknowledging it. We're trying. And if we get something wrong, apologies and give me a heads up, and I will always work to do better in the future. I always offer that in advance.
I appreciate that. That gave me the time to look it up, and I think it's disabled. so, so you
See,
vamped
I didn't
exactly how I needed you to.
perfect. And see, I didn't want to say disabled because again, like I'd heard differently abled, but I think we've gotten back to from what I'd seen previously, like disabled people just kind of acknowledging, look, again, like differently abled, it's fine, but it also kind of doesn't address the fact that no, this is a situation somebody has,
Yeah,
one way or the other. In this case, it's somebody who's lost the ability to walk, and so that that factors into accessibility concerns and things like that in the real world. And so a term that will indicate that that is a necessary concern and consideration, I think is appropriate. So
yeah.
we'll run with disabled.
Well, the thing was that it feels like they're reclaiming it, just
Hmm.
like how in this movie Penny kind of reclaims it when she, when
Hmm.
she's being questioned about it, she just says, "No, this is what I am," and we'll get to there. But then as I was saying that, I was thinking, wait a minute, not really, right?
Well, I know, and I personally I really liked where this movie ended up landing and getting to kind of it's really rare to be able to get it both ways. Like you said, there's a great scene where she really confronts somebody who is trying to give her basically the hysterical woman treatment
Right, yeah.
and literally uses the word hysterical. And she's like, no, like I can break down exactly what my circumstances are. But then we find out later, like you said, not really, but knowing what we know about this character and some of the things she's been privy to, she's speaking from something authentic, and I feel like we can examine this and kind of fill in some gaps and make some suppositions. But it feels like that still is relevant. What she said, it didn't undermine it by certain revelations that come later. Didn't undermine what she was saying. And I was actually worried about that at one point. I remember when it happened, and I was thinking, this is a possibility. I feel like the movie could go in this direction, and if it does, that would really be unfortunate. And it doesn't. And I got to say, I was really impressed with this movie. Took a direction. I like to think I don't. I always feel weird saying like, oh, like I watch a bunch of movies and I've seen it all, and nothing surprises me because some stuff does surprise me. And this one actually surprised me with what eventually happens here, and I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, and like three-quarters of the way, I was like, "Oh, I got this." Well, they telegraph it to you, so halfway through, you're like,
Yeah,
"Okay, I know what happened." Then three-quarters of the way, you're like, "Oh, I see what's actually happening." And then when what actually happens, you're like, "Where the fuck did that come from?" And
it
then
was so great.
and then when you think about it, you're like, "Oh, they told us what what was happening," you know? So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that part. And the thing about you were saying about hysterical women was that this felt like the writer Jimmy Sangster, his version of Gaslight. Right, so the movie
Hmm.
Gaslight from
Hmm.
1944, where the term gaslighting comes from, this felt like he took that and kind of made. I mean, we even have a thing about like in Gaslight, it was literally a gaslight that was being on in a room, and this one
Yeah,
it's a candle in a room, but still very very similar. So I kind of liked how he flipped it and made it his own thing. But
for sure.
okay, so Penny Appleby is a disabled woman in a wheelchair, and Robert leads her to the car as she says goodbye to the French flight attendant who was helping her. He lifts her from her chair into the car, and they kind of share a glance. And I'm like, okay, I see what's happening. And then he tips the sky cap. In the limo, Penny asks why her father couldn't come to pick her up. Robert says she's away. Sorry, Robert says he's away at the moment. And she asks where he went to, and Robert says, I didn't even know that he was going until your mother told me he'd already gone. Penny interrupts him very quickly says, she's not my mother. She's my stepmother, who I haven't even met before. And to me, this sounded really ominous. It's like they're when you chose this movie, I was like, oh, cool. I looked it up an hour 20. I was like, oh yeah, like I'm just gonna be able to breeze through these notes. No, there's so much layering, there's so much intricate detail and stuff that you have to keep track of. I was like, fucking Johnny. It was the
I wasn't
plot.
expecting that either. There's so much. It's really dense for an hour
Yeah,
and 20. I know. I was thinking the same thing. This should be a breeze, and no.
yeah. Then she asks Robert what her stepmother is like. And he's hesitant at first, but then he says that she usually drives herself or has Dr. Gerard drive her around. Penny asks who that is, and he says that's your dad's personal doctor who's always at the house. Penny says she didn't know her dad was sick, and Robert kind of acts like he's really stepped in it this time. He apologized for being the one to tell her, but her dad's been sick for some time, which was why he was surprised that he had left 4 days ago. We find out that Penny has been gone from France for 20 years. Was it 20 or 10? No, it's got to be, I think it was 10 years. I put,
I was gonna say, I think. Well,
yeah, I think it was 10 years
it might have been 20, but either way, yeah, it's
for,
been a long, long time.
for a while. Yeah. And then Robert also mentions that he's not sure when her father will be back. So on seeing this for the first time, I was just thinking, oh, she just wants to know where her father was. But knowing what we know now, she's the questions she's asking is for a different reason.
Do we hold on? Because it's do we just for context sake, do we just spoil what's happening? Should we do that so we can? Because I feel like we want to talk about this already, and
Let's
it adds so much to it. So I
Johnny,
don't know how you want to do that.
guess what? This is my show. We can do whatever the fuck we want. You want to spoil it? Let's fucking spoil it. Listen, I'll spoiler warning right now. This is a great film. If you haven't seen the movie yet, stop this, go to Tubi, watch it, come back. Or if you don't care, let's just talk about it. So go ahead, Johnny. What do you want to say?
Okay, so Penny, um, throughout the course of the movie, as the we'll talk about more through the notes, some really good scenes of she's basically like you said being gaslit, and they're telling her, oh, her father's just he's been away, he's elsewhere, he's somewhere else in the house, he can't be visited right now, etc., all these things. But she keeps going to different rooms and um sees his corpse, and so it becomes pretty apparent that somebody's trying to make her think she's crazy and she's seeing ghosts when in fact, like you said, I kind of saw this, it's a gaslighting situation. And so it progresses. Robert is the one helping her to find her father's, evidence that he's been killed, that he's actually dead. He drives her into town to report it to the police when they find enough evidence. And she thinks the stepmother is responsible for his death. The stepmother is on the side of the road, flags them down, and it turns out Robert gets out and leaves Penny. She's disabled. She's in the car in the back seat. She sees her father's corpse in the front of the car. it drives off a cliff, and because she's disabled, she can't get out of the car. Robert and the stepmother set her up. But then we find out she's not actually dead because she did get out of the car, because she's not disabled, because she's not even Penny. So the girl at the beginning of the movie, we are led to believe is Penny's close friend who committed suicide and was fished out
Maggie.
of the water, Maggie, because that's what Penny says. Turns out this girl that we thought was Penny the whole time was actually Maggie. And Maggie actually has been in cahoots with the doctor, played by Christopher Lee, and was very close friends with Penny, who Penny is the one who actually committed suicide. Um, because Penny was the one actually disabled and paralyzed because of a horse riding accident, I believe. Um, and so Maggie has actually orchestrated all this because the stepmother and um, Robert basically screwed up in their communication by communicating. I don't want to get too layered into that, but basically they gave away that they didn't realize that Penny was already dead of suicide, and were trying to impersonate her father with writing a letter when they communicated some things that he would have already known about, and they made a mistake. So she set this whole thing up with the doctor to go to the house, and has kind of, I guess, been playing along to some extent with all of this and setting it up to turn the tables on Robert and the stepmother, whose name I can't remember. Um,
Jane.
Jane. And so, yeah, like when you find out the way it gets revealed that actually Penny's been dead this whole time. And so then, even when that happened, I wasn't sure when they said that. It took me by surprise. And then I was also wondering, well, is it going to be like Maggie's like just delusional, and she took on this new personality? Was Maggie the one that actually killed
I,
Penny?
I thought the same
And so
thing,
then
right?
you find, I was thinking like, oh, like we're going to find out something wild here. And it is still pretty wild, but it's just like, it turns out she's been master planning this in her own way. And she's got somebody on the inside helping her counter this whole thing. So that's why I wanted to get into this, because as you mentioned, things at the beginning, like her asking about her father, all this other stuff, she's basically scouting the situation. You realize you could rewatch this movie, which I didn't do. Now I'm thinking about it, I need to rewatch it, because the whole time it's like a cat and mouse thing, um, but it's actually like a cat and cat. Like they're both the cat, and you just don't realize that that's what's actually happening here. Neither one, necessarily, or one of the people doesn't realize the person that they think they're setting up is actually setting them up in return. It's pretty brilliant, I think, actually.
Yeah, it's the thing we failed to mention, it was that um Penny slash Maggie actually mentions that, and I'm going to get there in a second, but she says that they were very close. Penny and Maggie were really
Yes,
close.
yes,
They were like sisters, and a lot of people mentioned how close they, like, how much they resembled each other. So that's how she was
yes.
able to do that. Otherwise, pictures
It's
existed at that time. They would have been
Well, I
able
was
to.
gonna say, it's one of those things where it's like, this is a movie. Like you said, they resemble each other a lot, so that helps. But it's also one of those things where this is the beauty of watching movies in a certain era, because this could still literally only have happened free, like, I don't know, 19. Certainly, you couldn't do this in the 90s onward. Like, I feel like there would be too much of a
Social
the,
media
the
presence or something.
traceability. Yeah, like the social media things, and like just being able to trace, and like, wait a minute, no, like people know each other's business too much. Like somebody would have been like, what? That's not Penny. What the hell are you guys talking about? Like
She, she,
somebody would have came. She'd like at the airport, somebody would have like noticed something. Like, I guess she's been gone for decades, but it's one of those things where like in the '60s, this feels like still plausible. Like I
yeah,
listen to podcasts where people talk. I mean, it's tragic, but I've heard people talk about like the whole idea of a missing person once upon a time, like in older times, was like, it was just like a foregone conclusion. You're basically not going to find somebody if like there was like a runaway kid or something like that. Like that, if somebody's husband wanted to abandon the family, like that's just a wrap. Like you could just move to the next state, and like there's no real hardcore way to like trace somebody. And so Yeah, it feels like this is like very doable. It's like, oh, she's been gone for decades. She comes back. Who knows how much she might have changed in that time frame. So yeah, it's and the stepmother's never met her, and so all these kind of things, it makes it more feasible that the people involved that she's trying to trick would not recognize that this is not the real person.
Right. Yeah. And so as we're going along now, we'll know based on because we just explained what's happening, we can see what Penny slash Maggie is actually doing, when she's asking these sorts of questions.
Yeah.
So next we see Robert driving up a gorgeous country road to like an estate or a villa in the French countryside. And I thought, oh, they got shmoney. They got money. Because he drives up to the front door and an older woman with short blonde hair walks up to greet them. Well, it's actually to greet Penny. She welcomes Penny home. Penny is surprised and says, Jane. It says if she's like surprised that her father has married this woman or something. I
Hmm.
wasn't quite sure where the surprise was there, but she did seem to be surprised. And Penny apologizes for her rudeness. Then Penny does a lot of apologizing in this movie. She's like always apologizing for her actions or what she just did or what she just said, and um, maybe it's a way of deflecting from her like
Yeah.
any like suspicion or something. So that's they exchange some pleasantries until Robert can come back and carry her into the house and onto her wheelchair. And Jane apologizes for the front steps and said that they haven't installed ramps everywhere yet, but they put temporary ramps everywhere they could. But she didn't think she'd want to use the front door much. So at this point, I was like, what the fuck do you mean? Why wouldn't a person want to use the front door? Do you want her to use the side door, the back door, or something? And then so I thought, oh, is it going to be something where you trap her in this house or something?
Yeah.
Because they made it very clear that these like ramps were made of plywood and they wasn't very like permanent stuff. So I thought there was something like her removing the ramps and make it sort of a whatever happened to Baby Jane situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And keep her trapped in the house, like you said.
Yeah. So then Penny once again, or sorry, so with some effort, Anne wheels Penny into the room that she's going to be staying at. It's on the first floor. And Penny asks again about her father, and Jane says that it was unavoidable, but he needed to leave to attend to some business deal. And she says, "You know how your father is." To which to which Penny says, "No, I don't think I'd recognize him if I saw him. It's been so long." Jane says, "No problem. Here's a picture of your father from a month ago." And I thought, oh, very convenient. So here again, based on what we already know, so when I first saw it, I thought, oh, it's been so long since she's seen her father, she doesn't think that she'd recognize him. But literally, she, it's very likely that she has never seen Penny's father and so wouldn't be able to pick him out. So she was asking for a picture to be able to identify him if she does see him. Is that what you took?
Right. Yeah. That like in like hindsight,
Yeah.
after the fact, after you get the reveal, it's like, oh, like you said, these are all things she's been setting up from the beginning, and she knows I need to plant these seeds of I'm unaware of this. You guys need to feed me information, and then she's collecting it and able to ready herself.
Yeah. It's very good. It's very good.
By the way, and then Penny's dad in these pictures looks he doesn't look. I'm like, you guys couldn't find a better picture.
It's
Like is
not,
this? He's so grim in all of these. I'm like, what the hell? Why
you
did
know
he
what?
pose for pictures like this?
When you said that, it reminded me of the pictures in the reading room at the Ghoulish Book Festival. You know, so every year, Max Booth and his wife Lori Booth put on the Ghoulish Book Festival, and it was just happened in March in San Antonio, downtown San Antonio, and they have it at the same place. It's like an old Masonic lodge sort of thing, and it's
Yeah.
really creepy. But specifically in the reading room, there's like these pictures of old white men all around, and they're not none of them are flattering. So it was like, why
No.
would you pick that picture? And that's what this reminded me
Every,
of.
yeah, very stern faced, very yeah, just like that. I guess is the way you took pictures once upon a time.
Yeah. But she does look at the picture. She smiles and she says she does think that she'll recognize him for sure. Robert brings in the rest of the bags and she dismisses him, or and Jane dismisses him for the day.
Mhm.
She says, "I shan't need you," which okay, fuck off, lady. She then shows Penny a bell on the wall that will ring to Jane's room and the kitchen. And then she says, "Wonderful having you here." Penny doesn't respond, and Jane kind of looks like, "Oh, okay," and then she fucks off. Um, the bell I thought would come back as well, and nothing. Never comes
No,
back at all.
no.
So alone now, Penny starts to unpack her things, but stops when she hears something outside her door, and her door leads to a courtyard. She goes to investigate, and she sees Robert walking up some steps into a room, and then so she also kind of notices a swimming pool. Later, over dinner, Penny tells Jane about life after her mother died and about her nurse, Maggie Frensham, who was close to her in age, and they were as close as sisters, and people even said that they look alike. She says that she loved her dearly as much as she did her actual mother. Okay, I think she might be taking a little bit of creative license here, kind of, like saying, "Oh yeah, I definitely know that she loved me as much as she loved her mother." So
Yeah, she's giving herself a like stealth self plug.
yes,
I love it.
because as we know, this is Maggie talking about herself,
Yeah, she's like, oh yeah, Jane loved me,
Yeah,
or Penny loved me rather. Penny
yeah.
Penny thought I was the best. Penny thought, I mean, I'm Penny, and Maggie was the best.
Yeah,
Yeah, Maggie was the greatest. But I'm telling you, people
that
said we looked alike, but they said she was probably a little hotter if it came down to it. But
yeah, all the boys like me best, but I'm not here to talk about that. But then Jane asks if that's why you didn't come home after your mother died, and Penny quickly retorts that this isn't my home. She once again apologizes and says that she just doesn't consider this her home. She just doesn't consider this her home at all. Um, it, Italy is her home, where her mother took her after the divorce. As long as Maggie was with her, she was happy. Again, you're laying it on a little thick here, Maggie. But Penny tells Jane that Maggie drowned, even though she was a good swimmer. Penny confesses that she nearly killed herself due to the grief. So again, this feels like Maggie's laying it
plugging
on pretty
something.
thick. Yeah,
Yeah, I gotta say, like at that time, even then, part of me was wondering. So I had no clue the Penny Maggie switch was coming.
right.
So I was wondering if maybe Penny actually killed Maggie or something, because it felt like an opposite "doth protest too much" kind of, which is a
Mm,
phrase I usually hate. I can't believe I just said that, but like it felt like she was like you said, kind of laying it on thick about Maggie, and then she also drowned even though she was a good swimmer. And I was like, I wonder if like there's something here where Penny actually, before I realized the switch, are we going to find out later on that Penny actually killed her friend and is a little bit loose in the like screws loose herself.
yeah, yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, well, it's a mysterious circumstance for a reason. They want you to believe something,
Right.
right? Yeah,
Right, and we got the body fished out right at the beginning, so it's like, well, that has to come back into play. That's going to matter in some capacity, and we find out how it matters later, but just not in the way I had anticipated.
yeah. So then she goes on to say that for 2 years after her mother's death, she as in Maggie was all I had, and then suddenly she was gone. Jane consoles her. Jane consoles her and says, "It takes time, and it's only been 3 weeks." Penny then says that when her father wrote to her to come stay with them, she was conflicted as she had never met Jane. But Jane says it was actually her idea. And Penny says that that was actually very kind. To which Jane says, "Did you expect a wicked stepmother from the fairy tales?" And she says, "I don't know what I expected." So it's kind of funny how that actually turned out, where it was actually a stepmother, a wicked stepmother thing.
Yes.
And I thought, because the whole time, Jane is just laying it on pretty thick. She's like, "Oh, oh, Penny, you poor thing. Oh, my sweet summer child." Like kissing her on the forehead when they first meet, and like, I was like, you're okay, you're trying a little too hard here, you know?
Yeah, you're trying to go against the you're trying to play against the role that you really are a little bit heavily. Yeah.
Yeah. So Penny then says that she's sad that her father couldn't be there, but then she remembers something that Robert said. She said that, or the Robert said that her dad was actually sick, but Jane says that there was nothing wrong with him at all. Um, Penny then asks about Dr. Gerard, and Jane says, yes, he is a local doctor and he does come to visit a lot, but he actually comes to play chess with her father. At this point, I'd like to say, fuck chess, because chess has taken over my life. I've actually brought Johnny in on it now. We're playing games, and Johnny, you're fucking frustrating. Just let me win. These moves you're making, dude. It's you keep locking my queen up or my king up, and I can't freaking do anything.
It's taken over. You're the one that brought me into this.
Yeah,
I was casual every once in a while play, and now I'm like I'm obsessed.
yeah.
And I'm like going through winning streaks, and I'm on a bad losing streak now, playing strangers online. I'm like, damn it, like, what happened? What flipped? And yeah, and then we're playing each other, and I'm like, I'll have a weird screw up, and yeah, it's completely taken over my life.
It's Zach, or so our friend Andrew Hilbert, he's the one who started us on
Okay.
the whole group's playing it. And then Zach Chapman, who's also been on the show, he sends me memes of how like chess will completely ruin your life and like take over your. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of feels like that. Like on a day when I'm having a good chess day, I'm like, fuck yeah. And then on a day when I'm having a bad chess day, I'm like, the fucking world sucks, man. Like, but it's
Uh,
fun. I've been enjoying
it
it.
is. I'm glad I'm not the only person going through those ups and downs, though, for
Yeah,
sure, because I feel the same way.
it's ridiculous. I'm thinking like fucking Johnny thinks I'm an idiot. Like I made this fucking move. I can't believe it. But yeah, it's been fun. My thing is that I'm scared to like try things to lose, but that's how you like learn is by losing. So
Right.
I'm playing my friend Les, who's been on the show previously, and I think I'm learning so much from him because he's just like balls to the wall, like attack, attack, attack. And I'm out in the defensive the whole fucking time. I'm like, fuck, man. Even when he loses, it's like it was really fucking fun. Whereas I'm all like, I'm more reserved at it, and I still end up fucking losing. So, all right, that's been the chess minute here at My Horror Confessional. But so, yeah, Jane does say that the Dr. Gerard will come play chess with him. So, Jane says that she's going to speak to Robert about like telling their business, but Penny begs her not to, which Jane agrees to. Then Jane kisses her on the forehead as a goodnight kiss, and then she helps her to her room. So, my question here is why do you think that they were going off of each other, Jane and Robert? Why they were telling conflicting stories? Was it to throw off the viewer and also Penny, or did they want to make Penny like confused? Like, what did you think the why they did this?
So, especially, I was thinking about this as the movie went along, and then especially after we find out all the revelations. Um, I think Jane and Robert didn't really, and when we find out the timelines of certain things too, they're just not on the same page. We find out later on too that
Mm,
like Jane is in denial about, oh well, my husband just had an accident, and Robert's like, there's no way you believe that, right? Like, I actually murdered
yeah,
this dude. Like,
yeah.
I killed him, and so she like he finally confesses to this, and she has like her brief conflicted feeling, and even then in that moment, I was thinking, I wonder how, because Jane's a slightly older woman compared to Robert. She was married to a much older man.
Mm,
And so she's getting the money for that, but she's still like the older woman. And we have a scene later on where Robert, as part of their master plan, is kind of seducing Penny slash Maggie and kisses her. And we see that Jane sees this. And so part of me was wondering too, like, I wonder if Jane is feeling a little suspicious about would this guy kill me if if he's like wants to get the money for himself later and maybe go with a younger woman at some point.
mm,
And then I'm wondering if if how Robert's feeling about this whole situation. So to me, I think all this confusion that they have is they put together this weird elaborate plan on relatively short notice, didn't cross all their T's or dot their I's clearly, and probably just were having he's having to answer questions immediately that maybe they just didn't prepare for. Like, oh yeah, just go pick her up from the airport. Probably she won't have that much to say or whatever. And then immediately she's like, why wasn't my dad here to pick me up? And he's got to be like, oh, he was sick, or like he's been sick, and he left right before, and like all these things he's got to make up, and like probably later on they're like, she's like, what the fuck, man? It's like, well, we didn't talk about this. This all happened within about 3 weeks, and we came up with this plan that is it feels like an overthought plan, as we'll go through like different points in the story too. It feels like one of those things that like it made me think of chess. I was actually
Yeah.
going to bring that up, where like it made me think of like I'm learning now like how dumb you can be thinking you're doing some smart shit, because it happens to me. You said you feel it. I feel it all the time. I was like, all right, boom, just this is gonna be put this guy in check. And I'm like, I just moved my queen in front of a bishop without even like, it's like, how did I not see that? That's right fucking there.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine a murder plot is a lot like that, where you're like, oh, we're gonna do this, and it's checkmate. And it's like, you could have like just done a lot of different things, a lot more simplified, that don't have to get into the intricacies of some of this plotting, and it would have been simpler. And instead, they made it a lot more complicated. And when you make things more complicated, you got to incorporate new lies and all this other stuff, and it makes it easy for yourself to get caught in certain bad lies that you didn't coordinate properly on.
And speaking, that also reminds me of another French black and white film from the 60s, Les Diaboliques.
Hell
Uh,
yeah, dude! I was thinking
yeah,
of the same damn thing.
yeah, because they're trying to, I won't get into that one, but I actually did that with Aiden Castellanos from the Susto podcast. We just did it a couple weeks ago. That was tons of fun, but very similar vibe to this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at night, Penny is woken by loud sounds and banging coming from somewhere. She turns the light on and gets in her chair to investigate, which is interesting the way she does, right? Because there's nobody there, but she does get into their chair as you would if you couldn't use your legs, or if you had lost your ability to use your legs. And so she goes to the doors, which lead to the courtyard. They're open and they're banging due to the wind. So she goes to shut them, but as she does, she looks out in the courtyard as she thinks she sees something. She goes out to the courtyard, she makes her way to the door and opens it and looks inside. So what she saw was that flickering from a candle. And she's looking around inside. She sees a bunch of stuff stored there, furniture, sculptures, etc. As she's continuing to look around, she suddenly sees a figure in a chair with the candle on the floor lighting his face, and it is her father. His eyes are wide open and transfixed on her, unblinking. She calls out to him, but he does not move, nor does he make a sound or acknowledge her presence at all. He doesn't even blink. Frightened by this, she screams out into the night and manages to get out of the room. But in her panic to get back to safety, she doesn't realize that the wheels to her chair have gotten too close to the edge of the pool and she falls in. She yells out for help, but slower and slower as her body sinks under the surface of the water. We see as Robert runs out of his room, then the scene fades to black. So speaking of Les Diaboliques, that also had a swimming pool scene in it a with a dead body in it. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
This definitely has a lot of. I was thinking of that as the movie went along, just like you. I was like, oh, this has a lot of that similar storytelling, plotting, even like you said, the features of uh underwater discoveries and bodies in pools, or bodies in bathtubs, like just all this weird similarities, like you said. It actually, like, it I was so curious about it. I didn't realize that was based on a book, so I've like checked out the book at the library on my phone, because I want to read it and see like what else, like, it's always more interesting to read the book and find out they couldn't put in the movie and stuff like that. So
That is
I'm
on
looking
my
forward to
to
trying to
be
read that.
read. Let me know what you think because when we did the episode like a month ago or so, I'm like, oh, I want to because I found out it was based on a book as well. So let me know what you think because I want to look
Yeah,
into it as well.
for sure.
So the next scene, we hear her frightened, ragged breathing. As she comes to, we see for the first time Saruman, or actually it's Dr. Pierre Gerard, played by Peter Lee. And he tells her that she's okay and reassures Jane as well. Jane asks her what happened, and she tells them that she saw her father dead in the summer house. They're like, "Oh, there's no way you could have seen that. You know, he's away. There's nobody in the summer house. It's locked." And she's like, "Please don't treat me as a quote unquote mental defective, whatever that means." She asks for the chair, and they tell her that it's still at the bottom of the pool and that Robert will get it in the morning. We understand now why they didn't want anybody else jumping in the pool to get the
Right.
wheelchair. Right? So she asks him to carry her. Sorry, Penny asks Robert to carry her to the summer house because she wants to see for herself. He does so, and as she goes to open the door, Robert informs her that it's always locked. But it was open, she says. But Dr. Gerard has to get the key down from above the door frame. And I thought, why does Dr. Gerard know where the key is? This ain't even his house. I was really rough on Dr. Gerard up until the end there. Because I was
Me
like,
too.
this motherfucker, like he was pissing me off.
Some of the stuff he says and like what he's doing and all, and then like yeah, at the end you realize because even when you get the revelation at the end that he's in on it with Maggie slash Penny, that like helped me to like accept certain things, like the scene we just talked about. She, ends up in the pool, seems like she's going under, maybe going to drown, and it was like that seems like really reckless to like be just relying on Robert to come save her if she suspects that these people might have killed. Like, why wouldn't Robert maybe just hold her underwater or something instead? But she
Mm,
she knows she's got a guy there, so even if Robert doesn't come out, whatever happens, she's got Dr. Gerard here as a backup. And so I was like, okay, like this, they actually really did a good job of like, you don't have to spell all that out, but you establish that she has somebody here to help her if the situation gets too dangerous, while she's in the house where she's expecting them maybe to try and do something.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And we're going to get to in a second. They're talking about the goings and comings of Dr. Gerard. So
Yeah.
she does say that there was a candle, but Jane turns on the light and says there's no need for a candle. As she does, we see that there's some stuff on the chair that could resemble a person in the dark. It's ridiculous. It's like a mop with a, a wig on it or something. That was weird looking. And it's like the comical how little they try to like make it look like it could be somebody.
Right.
And she's feeling foolish. Penny asks Robert to take her back to her room. Back in her room, she apologizes again for the trouble. And they say that it was probably the trip, and Dr. Gerard gives her a sedative. I wanted to say sedative, but I don't think anybody would get the reference. A sedative? That's from Young Frankenstein.
Oh God. Oh
Yeah.
man. I feel so. I feel like an idiot. I should have got that.
I want somebody to choose Dr. Frankenstein. I think that'd be so much fun. I count that as a horror comedy, you
Yeah,
know.
definitely, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
If it's not on the list, I need to make sure it's on there because I want to do it. But
Yeah.
um, he gives her the sedative, and then Jane again kisses her on the head, which is basically a good night kiss. In the morning, we meet the maid, Marie, who comes in with breakfast, and Penny asks Marie to check on the status of her wheelchair, which she says she will do. Jane then comes in and asks Penny how she got from the bed to the chair, and Penny says, I crawled. And so we know obviously that, I mean, maybe she did, maybe she thought people were looking at her, but more than likely she just walked over there because she's Maggie.
Yeah. it's one of those things where not at the time it didn't piece together at all like this possibility, but yeah, like I'm wondering now which one she actually did. Did she legitimately crawl through the house? Because like you said earlier, she does when she's in the privacy of the room, um kind of she doesn't get up and walk to her chair. So she is probably aware of the idea of like there might be people spying on me in the room, who knows what's going to happen. So there might be eyes around the house. So maybe
Yeah.
she did crawl the whole way, just like, damn it, I got to do this. Like I got to commit to the I got to commit to this piece. I got to commit to the
Well,
bit.
maybe she's method, you know.
Well, apparently the actual actress was Method, and her co-star Ann Taylor, who played Jane, was not happy about. There's a comment about that in the Wikipedia.
Oh, I
She was
remember
because
that. Yeah.
yeah,
And Todd, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And Todd, yeah,
But so she says, why'd she do that? And she's like, I couldn't sleep. But I was thinking when I thought that this was Penny, I was like, oh, well, she's an independent woman. She doesn't, even if her chair is not there, she doesn't want to wait around for somebody. Nobody wants to feel like that. And so she just crawled. And it's not maybe the most
yeah,
ideal thing, but she did it, you know?
yeah.
So that's what I was thinking. But and or Jane asks her if she took the other pill from Dr. Gerard, and she says no. Penny then asks about her wheelchair, and Jane calls down to the garage, and Robert informs her that it'll be ready in about 10 minutes, which Jane tells her. So then Jane tells her that her father talked about her a lot as a child. And Penny's like, oh, really? Like, because I felt very neurotic and afraid of everything as a child. I was wondering now if Maggie is talking about herself or if she's talking about what she knew of Penny as a child.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, it's got to be that, right? Well, I'd imagine it's probably what she knew of Penny maybe as a child.
Yeah.
It is hard to tell, like where does the line cross where Maggie's talking about herself, talking about Penny? Yeah,
Yeah. So then Penny asks what the summer house is used for, and Jane tells. I want to keep calling her Anne. I don't know why, but because her real name is Anne.
yeah,
But Jane tells her that they use it for storage. Penny asks when her father will be back, and Jane says that she doesn't know, but not today. We're like, okay, if you don't know, then why do you know it's definitely not today? That's weird.
right.
Um, Later on the cliffs of the ocean, Robert and Penny are chatting. And this seems a bit dangerous because I think this would be dangerous for a person who wasn't disabled, let alone a disabled person, because they are high up on the cliffs. It's like a sheer drop to the bottom and it's rocks. It's not
Yeah.
like water. It's very shallow water. So it's kind of really scary. I don't have a I'm not like scared of heights all the time. Like I could do skyscrapers, but like in dangerous situations, well, I don't know what the term is when you're like, should I just jump? Should I just jump? That sort of thing.
Oh yeah, like the
Uh,
intrusive thoughts.
yeah, the
Yeah,
intrusive thoughts. Yeah. So I don't know why they would go for it, but it was very picturesque.
it's beautiful. I absolutely would never in a million years stand at the edge
Yeah.
of any kind of cliff. I don't like heights, and there's just no way in hell I'm staying. I would be like 20 feet back. We still got a good view. What are we doing? We don't
Yeah.
need to be like right at the edge.
You go to the Grand Canyon, you're like standing in the car. You're like, all right, come, I'm good. I'm all right.
Exactly. I am. I'm like, yo, it's the Grand Canyon. Like the
Yeah.
whole reason to come here is because it's huge. I can
You
see
could
from
see
back
from,
here. If it's like some tiny ass canyon, I guess you got to go. But then I'm not going to go there. Like the
yeah.
whole that defeats the whole purpose.
So then Robert asks Penny if she could swim, and she says no. And he asks her if she's tried, and she says no. Here, I thought he was being an asshole, but perhaps he's doing a little recon to figure out
Right.
what he can do, because that later on we find out that he actually, like you said, drives her off a fucking cliff into the water, and he wants to know whether or not she can swim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Genius. This is genius. I'm
And
telling you, like they layered it.
they layered it really well, and it's coming after she's almost, she's had the incident in the pool, and so like you can at the time when you don't know what side Robert's on, you're like, well, maybe he's just looking out for her, like, or he's trying to, know in the future, like, oh, I gotta look out for her in case she gets falls into the water again. But no, he's actually, like you said, he's scouting murder plots.
Yeah. And so he asks if she's sensitive about her disability. And she says, well, apparently. And he asks her how long she's been like this. And she says, 9 years. He says that you were on a horse, weren't you? And she jokes, actually, the horse was on me. And
Yes.
he asks if that was the first time that you've joked about that. And she says, or she admits that she thinks that it was. So at this point, I really I'm liking Robert a little bit. Like he's cool. They're getting along. I like that she might have an ally in the house
Right.
because at this point we're being led to believe that Jane and Gerard are kind of out against her. So I really liked her getting an ally.
Yeah, me too. And then in hindsight, it feels like she clearly suspects Jane, I think. And she's trying to figure out what's Robert's complicity in all this.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
can I trust this guy, or like is he in on it? Is he on my side? What's the thing? And like that clearly becomes like she's trying to figure out what side does he play for.
Yeah. So then he then asks her why she hides behind those things, the sunglasses. She says, I feel more secure. I can watch people's eyes and I know that they can't see mine, which is literally a lot of times why I wear sunglasses. I like that it's very consistent like 60 years later. But I think that she was wearing the glasses because she wasn't sure how much she resembled. And so she was using the glasses to kind of hide her face a little bit.
That's smart, man. I
Yeah.
didn't pick up on that, but you're right. That's a little bit of a minor disguise. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
So, and then he says, and why should you be insecure? And she's like, oh, I don't know, my legs. But she says, being dependent on other people doesn't necessarily build your self confidence. And she says, my behavior last night wasn't too self reliant. Um, so then kind of Robert's kind of like trying to make her feel better. Um, and then he says, well, also he mentions like maybe you had too much wine at dinner. And she says, I think you may be right. And he says, of course I am. And I was thinking, this dude is kind of full of himself a little bit. He's a little bit full of himself, you know.
Just a tiny
Uh,
bit.
and he says, I was just thinking, like, you don't know her, you don't know her life, you don't know her challenges. He's like, basically, you just met her and you're like, you should pick up swimming, like sort of thing. And it's like,
Yeah,
how about you
yeah.
just let her deal with her situation the way she does?
You be encouraging. Try to figure out how you can help and not like suggest immediate upheavals of what she needs to do in her life.
It's very patronizing, sort of.
Yes, yeah.
So he says, or she says, I didn't thank you for last night, Bob. So they're now on but
Uh-huh, yeah.
she's calling him Bob. And he says there's no need. She asks how long that he's worked there, and he says he's been there for 2 years. And she asks if he likes it. And he says it's the only way I can drive expensive cars and live on the Riviera. She again says, but do you like it? And he says, well, I don't see much of your father. He mostly drives himself. So I want to stop for a second to say that part about driving expensive cars and living on the Riviera. That was a throwaway line for me. It's just more of him being humble when he first says it. I'm never going to aspire to be, having enough money to buy an expensive car or live on the Riviera or whatever. But then as the movie went on, like three-quarters of the way through, I was like, oh, you bastard.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you're here, you realize that this is the life that you want, and you went and took it for yourself.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Diabolical.
Yeah. So Bob goes on to say that the night that her dad went away, he ended up taking the small car, even though he doesn't like the small car. Penny asks Bob to take her to the summer house again because she wants to look at something. As they go in, he asks her what she's looking for. She says that she's looking for something that would make her think that her father was in there. But Jane shows up and tells her to go inside the house because she has a surprise for her. It's a phone call from her dad. So I forgot about this. So I have a
Hmm.
question for you just in a second, but um, Penny is very surprised and almost doesn't talk back when she picks up the phone, but she does say hi, and it is her father. And he asks if Jane told her that he was away for work and he apologizes for not being there. Penny says that it's okay, and he tells her to have fun and he'll be back in a couple of days. And she hands the phone back to Jane and they talk for a bit. So then Jane hangs up and says, "Doesn't that make you feel better about last night?" And Penny doesn't say anything. Jane then warns her about going to the summer house as it could just re traumatize her. Penny leaves by herself, and Jane tells her that Gerard will be there for lunch. And Penny goes away, and Jane just kind of looks after her. So, two things. One is, sorry, Penny doesn't know. First of all, who was making the phone call? Who was on the other end of the line?
Right.
Because we just saw Roberts,
Right.
unless Robert runs to, no, I don't think they had, well, I just don't think they had the technology, but like who's on the other end of the line? Anything there?
I have no idea. Like
Yeah.
that's one of those where it's like I think maybe they didn't want to like bog the story down with that like detail or something, but yeah, it had to be a third person or an extra person that's in on the scheme or somebody that they hired, because even then it needs to be somebody who kind of is able to do an impression of the father and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
And
doesn't seem like Robert's capable of, but like you said, you have to where's he going to get the extra line to dial in all that other stuff? It feels like it had to be somebody else.
yeah. And so my other question here is Maggie Penny is like she knows that the doctor is missing and the doctor doesn't mention anything about it. In fact, he says that he's gone away on vacation or on a business deal. So she knows for a fact that this isn't
Yeah.
the father, because if it was, he would mention, first of all, he'd be like, "What the fuck is Penny doing? Penny's fucking dead," like he would mention something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So here she knows that something has happened to the doctor, whereas before she wasn't 100% sure.
Right. This is they're giving her information without realizing it, and she's again in hindsight we're able to know now she's able to pick up information from this, but she has to play along with everything and kind of keep it to herself, whatever it is that she's learning.
Yeah. So back in her room, Bob asks to enter, looking dapper as hell. He's not in his chauffeur costume anymore. He's looking dapper. And he asks about the surprise call, and she tells him, I'm sorry, he asks about the surprise, and she tells him about the phone call. She also tells him that Gerard is coming for lunch, and he says, oh, then he needs to go change because he drives Gerard due to his car getting smashed up last week, and that he's a terrible driver. She asks, well, how he got there last night after she went in the pool. And he says that he didn't pick him up, but he definitely dropped him off. So Penny says that she was out for about 20 minutes. So there probably wasn't enough time for him to get there. But Bob asks if he was around for dinner. Penny says no, but either way, if he was, you would have had to pick him up to bring him here. Penny says she just doesn't understand what's happening, even after talking to her father. So my question is, or to me, it's obvious that they're trying to set up Gerard, right? They just picked the wrong
Right.
person because they don't know that Maggie is in cahoots with Gerard.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So
so,
they're trying to find somebody else to plant, to like you said, set up, be the fall guy, but they're not realizing again that they're being set up in turn.
yeah, I really love it that at almost every point, just like going back and talking about this movie, at every point, Penny, Maggie knew what was happening, you know,
Yeah.
and she was kind of in the power role here, even though she does allow herself to go in the car at the end, and we'll get to that. But like, regardless, still, I really liked her role in this.
Yeah.
So she says, actually, she hasn't talked to her father in 9 years, so it could have been anyone. So that's also like a little hint for us. And Bob asks why, and she says she doesn't know, but she just has a suspicion about something. So Bob's like, wait, why? Basically, in Bob's head, he's like, oh man, she didn't fall for our ruse. So that's why he
Right.
was asking why. So then Bob says he wants to show her something. He found some candle grease in the summer house. And he was saying that Jane was saying that you don't need a candle in that room, but obviously there was a candle there. He just doesn't know how long ago that candle grease had been there for. So later at lunch, Penny doesn't want to eat anything, and Gerard warns her that she has to kind of eat to get her strength and her mental health back up. But Penny doesn't know what he means, and he says that a person like Penny, with who has the history that she has to be careful, otherwise the temporary could be permanent, meaning her temporary visions and stuff like that could be permanent, meaning she could go insane. She takes this as a warning that they're going to institutionalize her if she keeps acting this way, and she leaves the table very angry. And Gerard and Jane look at each other, like give it like a kind of a suspicious look before continuing eating lunch. Again, I just thought this was masterful because we're the whole time, if this is your first time watching it, you're just thinking that Jane and Gerard are like looking at each other, but it's really like I don't know, like Gerard already knows something's up. Um, I guess I don't understand why Gerard and Penny are like having this kind of fight, but maybe it's just to throw off again, just
I
throw
guess,
off
yeah,
from yeah.
keep up appearances. Like we can't we need to keep them off balance. I'm guessing is like got to be like kind of the way things are, and they're trying to figure out. Um, probably it looks like Dad's dead. They need to get the evidence of it, so they're still sorting things out. Got to get evidence, find out who's actually part of this and who's not, who's part of the plot and who's not. And in the meantime, let's just keep up. The easiest way for them not to suspect that we're like any kind of in cahoots is for us to just constantly be arguing with each other.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's it happens more than once.
Well, and I think when she even says it, Penny's like, towards the end, she's like, me and Gerard worked together and basically hatched a plot. And so this is probably the
Mhm.
plot is that Gerard goes to Jane and is like, yo, I can, I'm worried for her. We might have to institutionalize her, but maybe he doesn't let on that he knows about the dad, right?
Right.
But he does like help Jane in her case to possibly get Penny institutionalized because, as we find out later, Jane didn't want to kill Penny. She was very sad about that fact, and she probably would have been happy just institutionalizing her.
Right. And you still get the inheritance, you can get the money that way.
Yeah,
Versus as we've determined, Rob has already killed once and is totally down to do it again. And seems like he's eager to that scene when he reveals he killed he killed Jane's or yeah, Jane's husband. Like he gets this crazy like the whole rest of the movie he's looked pretty stable. And he gets this really insane, dangerous smile and look on his face then. And it's like, oh, this guy's just like a madman a little
yeah,
bit. This just serial killer, man. It's he does a really good job. The actor there, Ronald Lewis, I think it was you said,
yeah.
does a really good job with that role.
Yeah, I thought so as well. So afterward, Penny asks Bob to get the key down from where it's usually kept for the summer house, but he says he can't because Jane asked for it back, and he had to oblige. So Penny says that she saw the candle last night, and Bob says he believes that she thinks she saw something. But Jane interrupts their conversation again and asks Bob to bring the car around. She then asks Penny if she wants to go for a ride, which she says no. Jane again kisses her on the forehead, but this time, or attempts to kiss her on the forehead, but this time Penny pulls away, and Jane's like taken aback by that, kind of insulted a little bit, but she plays it off, and then Jane informs her that she'll be back after dark. Later, Marie the maid asks Penny if she can go fuck off for the night, and Penny says sure. After she finds out that Jane wasn't back yet, so essentially she's going to be home alone. Penny goes outside looking for Bob, but doesn't find him in the garage. Sensing someone is there, she speaks out loud for her father, but she doesn't see anything. She goes back to her room and hears a piano playing. I thought it was kind of playing poorly. I don't know if I'm not a piano expert, but it didn't sound like the best composition. So I thought that was going to come back. Like we're going to find out um, that Penny's father plays the piano very well, and that Robert plays it poorly. And so what we were listening to was Robert playing poorly, but that wasn't the case. But that's what I was thinking was happening at the time. Um, but sorry, I lost my place. So she goes to investigate the piano playing, and as soon as she gets close to the door of the room where the piano music was coming from, it stops and immediately. And so this should have been a hit to us as I was reading. I believe it was in an IMDb because there was no reverberation coming from the music. You know,
Uh,
when you stop a piano, it reverberates until it stops. This it was a complete stop, which is like a recording, which it ended up being.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So she opens the door to find that the piano bench is empty and the I don't know the key the door that I don't know what that's called, but that's
I don't
also
know. Yeah,
closed. Yeah.
yeah. And so,
And,
yeah, like there's no way anybody was playing it.
and then we find out later that they tell her that it was locked. And I was thinking,
Yeah.
everything's fucking locked in this house. Like, you just don't trust people. Like, what is your problem? Like, what was the reason to lock the summer house door? Why is the piano locked? Why are all these rooms locked? And it feels like they're trying to say something like, I don't know, that she's locked in the prison of her body, the sort of thing that doesn't allow her to walk, that sort of thing. But it just seemed like, or they're untrusting people. I don't know what it was.
It feels like, yeah, it makes me think of a lot of my friends who've described to me they basically had like the nice grandma and the mean grandma growing up. And like the mean grandma was like, you had the room where like nobody's allowed to go in the room. You go in there, the furniture's all still covered in plastic. The kids can go in there, and it's like, why do you even have this room if nobody can enjoy this room?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that was like, it made me think of that. Like, we're gonna have a piano in here. I'm keeping that locked though. Nobody fucking touch my piano. I'm the guy who plays the piano. I don't trust any of you guys to do this. I'm locking this up. Some house, we're locking that. Like just somebody who's just like, no, nobody gets to do any of the cool shit around here. I've got the keys and I'm locking everything up.
Yeah, I know it's fucking boring as fuck, but you don't get to play the piano. You don't get to play the piano around
Go,
here.
go stand by the cliffs if you want something to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we do around here.
that's
Uh,
that's how we entertain ourselves.
so she stares for a second when suddenly Jane appears with Robert and asks, why didn't you tell me you wanted to use the sitting room? Penny asks who uses the piano, and she says it's only your father. He doesn't like anyone else messing with it, and that he keeps it locked. She then asks what kind of car is the small car that her father left in. Robert says it was a white Simca, which I have absolutely never heard of a Simca, but we're assuming it's a French car. So Penny says that she just saw it in the garage and that her father is back. Jane dismisses Robert and tells Penny that it's impossible. They just came from the garage and there was no car in there. Jane then attempts to placate her, but Penny pulls away from her and says to leave her alone. Jane immediately calls Dr. Gerard. Penny goes to see Bob, who tells her that there was no car there, but she insists that there was. So we know now that there actually was a car there and they're just trying to drive her insane.
Mhm.
She said that she heard it arrive and then she heard the piano being played. Again, he reiterates that the piano is locked. Jane calls the garage and tells Bob to tell Penny that dinner is ready. And at this point, Bob reassures her that he will help her figure out what's happening. At this point, I still like Bob. He's like, okay, I don't know what the hell's happening. I'm not seeing what you're happening, but I want to try to help you to get to the bottom of this.
Yes. I'm going to believe you at least enough to try to assist with this.
Yeah. So he closes the garage and she sees a shadow in the summer house against the candlelight. She goes to the summer house door, manages to open it. So I was thinking, oh, so shit isn't locked around here then, right? Just conveniently unlocked whenever you need it to be. And then she goes inside. At this point, I would have started yelling. I would have been like, ah, it's unlocked, it's unlocked. Because obviously, they're trying to set her up for something. But she sees that the chair is empty, but there is a candle on. There's a candle lit, and she does blow it out. She backs out of the room and looks out over the courtyard. She passes the pool and she's looking down. And she goes back to her bedroom and tries to turn on the lamp, but it doesn't work. She looks around in the dark and she suddenly sees something. Do you remember what she sees here?
In the chair in the dark,
Yeah,
she sees once again her father,
right.
and it's like the shadow of it, like he's kind of half in shadow for a moment, and then it comes into better view. It's a really well staged moment. It gets real quiet after that moment with the candle earlier, and the music had been, like you said, the use of music had been kind of ramped up, and then it gets real quiet for a while, and I was waiting for a jump scare, but at the same time thinking they don't really do jump scares like that back then. But this basically is the equivalent of like a 1960s jump scare, and I think it's really effective. It was like a really well done moment.
Yeah, so we see the dad, his eyes are wide open and it's like looking
Yes,
at her like it was the other day, but then his head immediately falls
yes.
forward and
As she screams,
yeah,
it's so good.
it's really creepy.
Yeah,
And she screams into the night. She calls out for Bob and he meets her in the courtyard. She tells him about the body and he runs to check. He finds nothing but Jane standing in the doorway, who turns on the light. Jane asks what happened, and Bob says that Penny thought she saw something. So at this point, we know, well, looking back at it, we know that Bob and Jane were working together. So I was wondering who took the body out because we saw Bob run in there, or did we? I don't recall now. Did he run in there and tell her to stay so that he can get rid of the body? But then Jane turns on the light all dramatically,
yeah.
so I don't
It's
know. I don't
that.
know what happened there.
This is the one thing I think in the movie that, like, some of it is just kind of, they're just hoping people don't look that much into it,
Yeah.
because even when we talk about later, like where the body was apparently stashed, it looks like for a lot of it is in the pool.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's why they don't want people going. But like, he doesn't look like he's soaking wet at any of these other times. So
Right.
like,
Yeah. They
are
do
they
mention
like
it
dragging him
once,
out?
but not about like
Right.
not soaking wet or anything like that.
No, like, and it's not like they're checking the chair later, and it's like he should be like, the chair should be damp every time they sit him in these, and all this other stuff. There should be like, you there'd be like traces, like there'd be like droplets of water everywhere if you're dragging this body out of the pool every time and doing this. So it's like, that's one of those things where they're just like, look, we think this is a pretty cool thing, and there's going to be a pretty cool moment when they find him in the pool later and find out this is where he's been kept this whole time. So um, we're
I
just
I,
going to roll with that, and people aren't going to ask too many questions, hopefully.
I mean, I tell you how they fix this. Carpet. Just have carpet. you know?
Yeah.
But then Jane asks, what Penny thinks she saw, but Penny comes into the room and immediately apologizes for making a fuss. Jane asks her what she saw, but Penny doesn't say. And Jane says she needs to be careful because um, of because her poor head won't manage any more shocks. Jane tells her that Gerard will be here for dinner again, and Penny asks why. And Jane says that she can cancel if she likes. But at this, Jane is doing this saintly stepmother thing that I noted here
Mm-hmm.
that was really starting to grate on me. But I think why do you think that Penny doesn't tell Jane what she saw?
This is, I think they're realizing the plan. She's realizing the plan is to start making me seem like I'm hallucinating things and I'm out of my mind. And
Right.
they want to institutionalize me. So I have to start denying. Well, in hindsight, when I was Watching it in the moment, I was like not really sure. I was thinking maybe she's just kind of she's one way or the other, it kind of leads to the same destination. She's trying to like not seem as like she's mentally deteriorating. And in the moment, I was thinking she was kind of like maybe saying, I want to kind of keep this close to the vest. I know what I'm seeing. I know somebody's messing with me in here, but I can't trust these people. So in the meantime, I'm not going to give them what they want, which is for me to start having a breakdown. I need to keep my wits. In hindsight, I think it's also a matter of them kind of feeling out the plan and realizing, oh, her and Gerard feeling out the plan. They want me to seem like I'm having a breakdown so they can institutionalize me. So I need to start showing them that that's not the case. Which then, in turn, I think is the point where Bob decides we're gonna have to kill her instead because she's pushing back against the you've gone insane narrative and not reporting these things she's seeing, we're gonna have to adjust this and maybe kill her. So it seems like the original plan was this one way. When it starts falling apart, they have to switch gears to the murder.
And I also think that perhaps um Penny, what's her name? Michelle or Mel? Damn, what's the other girl's name? Her friend
Maggie.
Maggie. Maggie's like, oh, I might actually be in danger of being put in
Right.
an asylum by Jane. So
Yeah.
I thought that might be a reason as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so she's like, I can't keep saying that I'm seeing this dead man in all these different parts of the house, and then you show up and it's not there. That's like definitely going to get me institutionalized. So I got to start saying, nope, sorry about that. I I promise not to do this anymore. And that's when things kind of change and escalate at the same time.
Yeah. So then Jane dismisses Bob, but Bob comes back after Jane has left, and he tells Penny, um, sorry, and Penny tells him what she saw. Bob checks the seat that Penny told him her dad was sitting on, and it was wet.
Right.
But like you were saying, there would be a lot more water everywhere, you know?
It'd be like, yeah, like because presumably Jane dragged him out, she would be wet. Like he's been soaking in the
Yeah,
pool. Her dress
exactly.
would be wet. Like
You
it'd
know
be
what's
everywhere.
funny is like I think of the scene that just happened where like where Jane is like, honey, you need to be more careful because of your mental state and all that. While out literally outside, just to the right of the doorway, is the body of her dead father, and like the water's starting to leak out right there, you know? Oh man.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
it's one of those things. Like you can't overthink that because like logistically this would be a little bit absurd.
yeah. So after Bob finds that the seat is wet, he starts to become suspicious and he looks around pensively and he says, Penny, your dad's a rich man, right? She says, yes. And he asks, who gets the money if he passes? She says, I do. And he asks, all of it? And she says, there's a trust fund, and Jane actually gets the interest from the trust fund. Could you imagine being able to live this kind of life just on the interest of a trust fund?
Interest. It's absurd. These people, like you said, they got money. They
Yeah,
are extra. I mean, you're already in the French Riviera. This is extraordinary wealth. This
yeah,
is obscene wealth.
yeah. So he asks, could the will have been changed? And she says, no, the money was actually her grandfather's, and he didn't believe in second marriages. The money will go to Jane if Penny is found insane, however. And so they both look at each other, and Bob says that they want you out of the way before it's discovered that her father was dead. That way, you won't collect the money. Bob thinks that they could have killed her if they wanted to because they most likely killed her dad. So they most likely don't want to kill her. They just want to institutionalize her, which was probably Jane's original idea.
Yeah.
So more than likely, they say her dad had an accident and they want her out of the way before it's discovered. Bob says that they need to find the body. It has to be somewhere. And he goes to look, but Penny wants to go with him. So he says that they need to wait until Jane has gone to bed. Penny then thanks him for believing her, which I thought was like when I thought it was just actually Penny, I thought it was kind of sad because, she's been in a situation where nobody's believing her. And finally somebody does, and she's just so thankful for it. But at this point, knowing, it's Penny Maggie, she's probably like, oh, I was kind of feeling you. Now I know you're kind of like the good guy, and maybe it is only Jane that, that she's really thankful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. She's, again, like still filling out the process of what this guy's about.
Yeah. So at dinner, Penny refuses wine from Gerard, which I thought was hilarious. She
Yeah.
literally puts her hand over her cup, and so they're eating around the table. He hands Jane the bottle, and then they exchange a glance. Again, they're really good at the screenwriter and the director and all that. We're good at like making you. They're faking one way, and I was completely with them that way. Gerard says he wants Penny to see a specialist in Zurich about her legs. This is when I was at peak fuck Gerard
Yes, me too.
because, like, I was like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like, she's gone to doctors for the last 9 years. Like, the last time she had her legs checked out was 3 years ago. And I'm like, dude, fuck off. But he asks her if she knows about hysterical paralysis. She's not familiar, and he, of course, takes the opportunity to tell her he's relishing in it. And he says it happens because of a scare or a fright. The person can lose the use of a muscle or a limb. He says there's no physical reason, just mental. It's a mental block. And at this point, Penny has had enough, and she says, "You're trying to tell me that I'm not her words, a cripple? It's all in my mind. Was the horse that fell on me in my mind as well?" And I added, "You fucking idiot." Uh, he says, "Well, I admit the cause was the horse, but the physical part could have been repaired, but not the mental one. That is why he's worried about her mental health." She goes on to read Gerard for the filth he is. She tells him her exact prognosis down to all the medical wording. And she says, "Do you think I like this? Not being able to dance, to walk like everyone else?" She says that you say my mind is affecting my legs. You're wrong. It's my legs that are affecting my mind. That would have been a really like that would have hit more if this was actually Penny.
Right. And I do feel like this is Maggie maybe speaking from like Maggie has indicated she was there the whole time for a lot of this stuff we find out, like when she was
Yeah.
speaking through Penny. But I do wonder if this is like her basically rehashing something she's heard Penny say to somebody else
Yeah.
at some moment because she's able to like spout this. Now they've also probably rehearsed this because it's her and Gerard in cahoots, and we find
Yeah.
that out later. So that she might have rehearsed this. Like you said, it would have hit harder if this actually is Penny instead of Maggie.
Well, it
But
hits harder
I,
now, but like looking back at it, you're like, oh, maybe
yeah,
but yeah, you're right about them like rehearsing it because it's like they're putting on a play and Jane is their audience.
yeah, and I'm guessing, like the movie leaves you to wonder these things. That's kind of the beauty of the movie. This is like their last push to kind of maybe force Jane to abandon the plan because Gerard's presenting this idea of like they are in together with this, like you said, doing a play that's basically like she could be mentally unwell, it's making her paralyzed, and this would support the idea that she's also hallucinating and all these things you're trying to do. And then this is Jane, or this is Penny Maggie getting the opportunity to definitively say no. There's nothing wrong with I'm not mentally unwell really. Like if anything, yes, my legs are affecting my mind, but just as an emotional state, it's not. I'm not having a breakdown because of this. I'm not in a hysterical paralysis way. And then thinking back on it after we get the reveals, it's like, oh, this is maybe their attempt to try to get Jane to say, you know what, she's too psychologically strong. This plan's never going to work.
Mm,
maybe we just need to call the whole thing off. And they instead she changes course in a different way. But I'm thinking like this is probably the motivation for some of this at the table.
I like what you're just saying. I really like that. It also made me think that perhaps this is Maggie saying pretending to be disabled is fucking with my mental health right now.
Oh, and maybe yeah, this maybe shit.
It's
Like
like
yeah,
it's
like
like
this plan.
she's being very clever. What it is, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
But she does say, I'd rather not talk about it anymore. Jane tries to defend Gerard, but Penny says, no more, and I mean it, which I like that she stuck up for herself.
yeah, for sure.
So after dinner, Bob goes to see Penny, and Penny tells her that Jane went to bed about 20 minutes ago. He says that the body could only be in the deep freeze. And he says that a week ago, Jane asked him to put a new lock on it. And this was when I was like, at first, my first inkling of is Bob in on it as well. This is, I even wrote the note down here: is Bob in on this, or is he the one doing it? And I said, I'm gonna be pissed. So, and I was pissed. So they go back to the kitchen where the deep freeze is, and Bob just happens, he just unscrews the latch. I'm like, what's the purpose of the fucking lock then? If you could just unscrew it, you know?
Yeah,
But whatever. And then they slowly open it to reveal that there's nothing in there but an animal carcass. So Bob takes her back to her room and says that he'll fix the lock later. I thought this was telling because he didn't have to worry about anybody finding it unlocked because he's the bad guy. If like
yes,
Jane finds it unlocked, he's not going to get in trouble or anything, you know? So
no,
this is like he's uh Penny and Gerard are putting on a play for Jane, and Robert and Jane are putting on a play for Penny. It's like they all think they're fucking with each other. It's amazing.
yeah, it's pretty great. It's pretty great.
So the next day, they're back at the cliffs, and Bob says that he can't tell them that we can't tell them about our suspicion because we don't have any proof yet. Um, and at this point, this is when I had my inkling. I was like, fuck, it's Bob. He wanted the good life, the Riviera and the cars. This is when I was finally like, okay, it's him. So Penny
Yeah,
asks, where else can the body be? And she then asks Bob why he's helping. And he says, because I like your father. I don't like your stepmother. I don't like Gerard. I don't like to see somebody getting shafted, basically. And also because you're pretty. He lifts her up and he kisses her. He says, I didn't mean to do that until all this was over. But she says, I'm glad you did. And then just above them on the top of the cliffs, we see that Jane was watching them the whole time.
yes,
So later, Jane is sitting around the table with Penny for tea, some afternoon tea or something, and she asks if perhaps Penny isn't getting too close to Bob. She says she wants her to be happy, but not with Bob. She says, "I'll throw you a party and have a bunch of young people come over," but Penny says no to the party idea. So Jane says, "I know you're bored, but maybe we can get the pool cleaned out and you can swim." And I thought again, like now, Jane is trying to see whether or not she can swim, right?
yeah,
So Marie interrupts with a phone call for Jane. Jane looks at, uh, sorry, Marie, the maid, interrupts with a phone call for Jane. Then Penny looks out at the pool and has a thought: is the body in the pool? Jane comes in and says that she's leaving and won't be back until 10. Penny says this is okay as long as Robert is home. And then at which point Jane says that she'll drive herself. So I wanted to get done with this scene before we go back to it. So Jane saw Penny kissing her lover, Robert, and was like, "Oh, I don't want you getting too close to him," sort of thing. You know, like it's for your own good, but it's actually because that's my boyfriend, fucking bitch.
yeah. This is my fuck boy. Get
Yeah.
your own.
So then Jane nope, not Jane, sorry. Penny continues to stare Penny continues to stare out at the pool. Then she goes out to it at night, and Bob shows up in his Speedo looking
Just
pretty
spectacular
upset.
speedo.
Yes, it's a banana hammock, basically.
I mean, yes, it's yeah. It they were
This
they
is
were.
France.
I mean, I guess yeah, I guess so, man. I was not expecting that moment necessarily.
And I'll
Good for
tell
Bob though.
you, so basically, Robert is or Bob is going to go into the pool to look for a body, but because it's an older pool with no, they didn't have any filters back then, I believe. It was just a hole in the floor, and they had to get the water out and then put in new water. So, as someone with a pool that gets dirty as fuck when it's not cleaned, I'll say, fuck that. I'm not going in there. It gets so nasty and grungy, and there's just scum on top. I'm not getting in there. But
Ugh.
Bob goes in there and he goes in with his goggles and he's like diving. He comes back up and says it's pitch black down there. But he goes again. He dives deeper and deeper and deeper until at the very bottom of the pool, we start to see out of the gloominess comes a body, and the eyes are wide open. It's Mr. Appleby, Penny's father. And he looks great. This mannequin, this whatever they got going on. I don't know if it was the actual dude, played by
Whatever it is,
Fred
it's terrific.
Johnson, but it looked great. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you what you thought.
I thought it was awesome. I mentioned the Shelley Winters, uh, she being in Night of the Hunter earlier, and it
Yeah.
made me think of that scene where we find her at the bottom of the we they show her corpse after she's been killed by Robert Mitchum in the car at the bottom of I think a river, and it made me think of that. I was like, oh man, finding a body in the depths of like water in the darkness is like a really automatic, eerie, creepy thing. And yeah, I thought it was like very effective. Like you said, it looked great. Mannequin, actual actor, I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it looked really, really creepy and like just really well done.
Yeah. And the other thing is that in the story, Bob knows that that body's down there. That corpse has been decomposing for a week at this point, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe a little bit longer because at least maybe 3 weeks because that's she got the letter that for her to come home, and Penny knew that it wasn't real or whatever. So it's
yeah.
been about 3 weeks. It's been decomposing. Maybe they had it in the deep freeze until she showed up. So maybe it's just thawing out in the water or whatever. But I mean, there's got to be some rot in there, and he
Oh
went into
yeah, no,
swim in that thing. It's
yeah,
all in his
yeah.
hair. That smell doesn't
Ugh.
get out, dude. It's nasty.
No, no.
So when he comes up the second time, Penny says he's there, isn't he? He says yes. She asks what we should do, and he says go to the police right now. And Penny wants to go with. He says that there's no use in waiting. So he goes off to get ready, and she goes back to her room. He makes a point to tell her, let's meet out in front in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
This is because, as we find later, he needs to transport that body from the swimming pool. So he
Yes.
got to dive back in there, pull that body out, drag it all the way to the car, and put it in the front seat. It's wild,
Yes.
wild. Um, so later, Robert pulls up with the car and places Penny into it. I'm surprised she doesn't smell it,
Smell
but
something.
yeah.
Maybe he's got the the Christmas tree air freshener. He's got those under the seats.
Yeah. She's like, why does it smell like a rotting corpse and the car freshener in here?
Yeah. Oh man, it smells like decomposition and pine. Well, just focus on the latter.
Yeah. So he asks her if she wants her chair, and she says no, they can leave it. And she asks what if they find her chair, and he's like, it doesn't matter now. Once we get back, nothing matters. And I was thinking the same thing. Penny slash Maggie is probably like, once the cops know, I can stop being Penny, you know, and I don't need the wheelchair anymore. So
Right.
he says that they're going to Cannes, which is only about half an hour away, and he says it'll all be over soon. Penny thinks about her father. She says she didn't really know him, but knew he was kind to her and to her mother, and always remembered her birthday. She says, how could this happen? Agreed, says Bob. And she says, but she must have loved him once. And Bob says, love changes and you can find another love. And Penny says, Dr. Gerard. And Bob says, I suppose, with a bit of a smirk on his face.
Yeah.
As they're driving, they come across Jane in the road, flagging them down. And Penny asks him not to stop, but he says she'll recognize the car and he has to. At this point, I was like, the fuck you do? Just keep fucking going. Run her
Just keep
over.
going.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
this point, like, as far as we know, she's a murderer. But of course, he stops the car. He gets out and he walks up to her and he kisses her. Penny sees this. Then we notice that the car starts lurching forward toward the cliffs. And she leans forward to the steering wheel as to try to stop it. And she sees her father's lifeless body in the driver's seat. And as the car passes Jane and Bob, Bob appears to try to stop the car, which I was a little confused by. But then Jane looks on as the car goes over the cliff, and then we hear it crash into the sea below. And this said, I fucking knew it. So, so there's a couple things here. What did you think when you saw, like, at what point were you like, I fucking knew it? Was it when he stopped the car? Was it when they kissed? Like, what were you thinking here?
When he stopped the car, I was like, "There's no like you like the reason to stop the car was too flimsy."
Yeah.
I was like, "You don't have to stop the car just because like oh she'll recognize it and she'll
Do
like
what?
who cares? Like
Yeah.
you said,
Yeah.
who cares? Like what is she going to actually um you know like I get like maybe the idea of like oh well she could go report it or what or like she could go back to the house if she suspects something and maybe try to hide the body in theory, but it was like no that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to stop the car, so I knew then right away that he was in on it.
Yeah. And then how about him running after the car? Did you see that as well? Did you notice that?
Yes, I did, and that's one of those like that's one of those things again where I think like they were like we're doing this for the audience but it doesn't really make
Audience.
sense for the story
Yeah.
because it like gives you like that last second of being like maybe this is not what we think and we want to hold off to the last second of a certain surprise or something like somehow this is still an accident on his part or something.
Yeah.
And then no actually like it doesn't there's no real reason for him to reach back for the car.
Yeah. So then Bob and Jane look at each other. Jane asks if she's really dead, and Bob uses a derogatory term for a disabled person. And she says she was that, wasn't she? She's dead. And Jane asks, will it be all right? And he says, yes, it's going to be all right. There's going to be an inquisition, but it'll be fine. Later in the house, Jane comes downstairs to hear the piano playing. She walks into the room and we find out that it was actually a recording. And Bob is pouring them a drink. They kiss in a lover's embrace, and she asks him to turn it off, which he eventually does. Jane is saddened by Penny's, well, I don't know if saddened's the right word, but like she feels bad about what she just did about murdering somebody. Um, Bob draws her closer and toasts to them, and Jane wishes that they could have done it without killing her. She said that she believed after her husband had an accident, it would be all right. But Bob just smiles at her, like you were saying that smile earlier. He smiles at her and says, you never believed he had an accident, did you? The old man could swim like a fish. I held him underwater. And then he like is forced kissing her a bunch of times. And finally, like Jane kisses him back. So we find out that here that Robert killed Mr. Appleby and set this whole chain of events into motion.
Yes, yes, and seemingly Jane didn't even know about that. And there, like I say, in the moment, it feels like she's like, "Am I sure I can really trust this guy?" Um, and it's a very short movie, so you don't really get too much more to elaborate on that. But I would imagine she'd have to like be worried about. I mean, he does eventually kill her by mistake, but she'd have to be worried that he's going to do this on purpose at some point. He's going to like be walking around in France and see some young French thing and be like, "Wait a minute." Like what is what? How can I go back and adjust the will and stage another freak accident, get
Yeah.
rid of get rid of Jane, and move on to somebody else here?
How can you live? You can't live with a person after that because you can never trust them. You just be looking over your back the whole time.
I would think so, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's going to stop him from doing the same thing to you that he's done to two other people at this point now?
Yeah. So the next day, Jane and Bob are filing a police report, and the inspector says that your report comes to me at the same time as we of us just getting a report of a car going over the railing and crashing into the water. He offers his condolences. She tells him a story of her husband arriving last night and Penny and him going for a drive to kind of reacquaint themselves. The inspector says that Mr. Appleby's lawyer has been informed and will be arriving later to the house to deal with the will and all the necessary paperwork. He sends Jane home. Sorry, he sends Jane home and tells Bob that he needs him to stay so he can identify the car. Bob says he will wait for the inspector outside, and when they step outside, Dr. Gerard steps out of another room into the room where the inspector was and kind of glances at him. So at this point, I was like, oh man, have I been wrong about Dr. Gerard this whole time?
Right, right.
Yeah, because I had kind of forgot. Once I saw that it was Bob was a bad guy, I forgot about fucking Gerard. So at the scene of the crime or accident, they don't know yet. There's a crane trying to retrieve the car. The inspector asks Robert if he can identify the car, even though it is still underwater. And Robert says, of course not. The inspector was trying to be slick there and trying to catch him.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, so then the inspector asks him to stay where he's at while he goes talk to basically CSI. He calls them frogmen because they're wearing scuba gear and all that sort of shit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So back with Jane, Mr. Spratt, who is Penny's father's lawyer, has gone to the house and he tells her that everything was to go to Jane, or I'm sorry, everything was to go to Jane. Jane asks, what about in the event of like some sort of, I didn't quite follow it, but essentially it was a common accident where they try to decide who died first. And
Right.
Spratt, who's the lawyer, says that hardly matters here. And Jane says no, because they were both in the car together. And Spratt's kind of not understanding. And he says, so she's like, basically, Penny and her father were in the car together. And he says, that's impossible. Jane says, oh, the police didn't tell you. And Spratt says, no, it's not possible because your stepdaughter, Penny, committed suicide 3 weeks ago. And I was like,
Yes.
oh, shits.
That was a great twist.
Yeah, so immediately I'm thinking, oh, it's fucking Maggie. But this was like looking back at it, like talking with you, like we see the seeds of it. But for me, at the very least, I did not see this coming.
Yeah, I didn't at all. Like
Yeah.
this was I figured some kind of the story, something's gotta happen, but I did not anticipate this being what happens. It was pretty great.
Yeah. So I know that this is black and white, but I could see Jane's face going pale, you know.
Yes.
And Spratt goes on to say that Penny went on a holiday with her friend Maggie Frensham and she drowned herself due to her poor mental states. Back at the scene of the crime, the inspector Legrand asks Gerard to come down to identify the car. He identifies the car, and the inspector says that it's a strange thing that they only found one body. They only found Mr. Appleby's body.
Mhm.
So back with Spratt and Jane, he's getting ready to leave and file the paperwork when he asks about the safety of Jane's friend. And Jane doesn't know what he's talking about, and he kind of indicates out into the courtyard. Jane looks behind her into the courtyard and she sees Penny slash Maggie is sitting in the wheelchair on the top of the cliffs looking out at the sea with her glasses on. At this
Yes.
point, had you kind of put the pieces together, or were you like, what the fuck's happening?
No, I'd put it together by then.
Okay.
The
Okay.
the one thing I wasn't sure of, like I said, I wasn't sure of the thing I hadn't put together was that Maggie had an actual plan. I thought it was gonna be like just a coincidence of like, oh, Maggie like had a mental break herself legitimately and thought she was Penny, like because of how close they were, or whatever, like was described earlier. But instead, it's like when she starts breaking down later on, like, no, like we thought something was up. I orchestrated this with Gerard. I had a master plan, so I didn't know that, but I knew it was like, okay, it's at least this is Maggie. This is what's happening, etc.
Yeah. So then Jane goes outside and Jane or Penny Maggie says, "Good morning, Jane. Why so silent?" And Jane says, "Who are you?" And finally, Penny says that I'm actually Maggie Frensham. And Jane says, "I don't understand." So Maggie says, "I spent 3 years watching Penny die. After her mother died, she was all alone, and that was unbearable for Penny. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer, and I wrote to her father. Her father said that she couldn't come home now because there was something strange happening." Maggie goes on to say that it was you he was talking about, Jane. You were the strange thing. Penny finally stopped struggling against life and she drowned herself. 2 weeks later, Maggie gets a letter saying, "Please come home. I have always wanted you here. Signed, Father." Penny was dead and her father knew it. And because Maggie told him herself. And he also told, so Mr. Appleby told Maggie about Dr. Gerard, how they were a friend, that he was his friend. And after the letter arrived, she reached out to him and they decided to work together. So this is when they started to lay the plot, hatch the plot. I
Yeah,
think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
yeah, hatch the plot. Yeah,
So Jane says, or Jane asks, but she uses the derogatory term for a disabled person, but essentially she says, "So you're not disabled?" And Maggie stands up and says, "No," like
yeah.
triumphantly. She says that she opened the car door last night and jumped out of it. And at this point, Jane starts trying to blame Robert, but she stops herself. And Jane asks if she wants money. Maggie says that Penny left her pretty well taken care of. So here's my question. Was was Maggie completely tricked by Bob? And is that why she put herself in the car?
That's what I think. It has to be that she still trusted Bob,
Okay.
and he put on a good performance right up to the end. So that's why she gets, because otherwise it's way too reckless to get into the car with him,
Yeah.
knowing that what he's capable of potentially. So I think right until that last moment, she didn't. She had thought Bob um wasn't in on it, and it was just all Jane.
Right. And then so that's even more important when she said earlier, "Thanks for believing me," or "Thanks for helping me," or
Right,
something like that. Yeah.
right.
So back with Bob, Spratt drives up and tells Bob that he just left Jane and that she wasn't looking too hot. He said nobody's up there but the disabled person in the wheelchair. With this news, Robert runs off. And back at the house, Jane begs Maggie, asking if there's anything that she wants she would give her, but Maggie says no. Jane sits down on the chair, looks out at the water, and cries. By this point, Robert has arrived and is frantically looking everywhere for the the disabled person in the wheelchair, who he believes at this point, I believe, is still thinks that it's Penny. So he's looking for Penny, right? So he looks out at the courtyard to the cliffs. He sees the back of the. Do you want to say what happens here?
Go ahead. This is great. This.
So
If I'd have been in a theater, I would have howled seeing
yes.
like what he does here.
So he sees the back of the chair and he runs full speed and kicks her off of the ledge. Man, I was dying. It was so,
Immediately.
yeah.
Just
Doesn't
no.
stop.
Oh, like, like there's no. I was thinking, oh, he's gonna walk up and push her, like sneak up, and no, this guy just like full speed run, full kick, like full front kick like an MMA fighter, and kicks Jane in the chair off the cliff.
Full
I
stop.
couldn't
Like no,
believe.
yeah, full send, I should say.
Oh, you got you like to anybody like just it's worth watching the movie for just that alone. As great as everything else is about it, just that moment, the sheer audacity of it. It was like this guy is like purely psychotic. I mean, he's not thinking twice about this. That is that is insane. I can't believe he the
The
way he
best
did it.
part about it is the kick. He doesn't push. He
Yes.
fucking kicks the
No.
shit
He
out of it.
kicks the shit out of this wheelchair.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ, man.
he punts her like a football. It's wild. Um, but Jane manages to turn around midair and like as she's falling and she yells out Bob as they make eye contact, and then she splats down onto the floor, the sea floor below. He didn't seem too worried about it. He's just like he doesn't say no or anything like that. He just looks down on Jane's lifeless body floating in the sea. Inspector Legrand calls out his name, and he turns around, and there is Inspector Legrand with a couple other police, and he tells him to come with him. So Bob walks down and passes Maggie and Gerard, and kind of just gives them a look of disgust or contempt.
Yeah.
And Maggie goes to the cliff to look at Jane's body, and Dr. Gerard goes
Sure,
up to
yeah.
her and says, "Come on, Maggie. There's nothing there for you, or there's nothing more for you here." But she stands her ground. She stays there and looks down at Jane's body. And I swear, I see the slightest smile start to come at the corner of her lips. But immediately we see the end, and that's the end of the
Yeah.
movie. So we're going to rate it in a second here, Johnny, but I wanted to ask you, what did you think of the ending of
I
Taste of
loved
Fear?
it. I absolutely loved it. Like you said, it kind of reminded me of Les Diaboliques, that whole vibe, and he right down to the French inspector and everything, and he like seems like he's like aware of things and trying to catch them in their lies early on,
Yeah,
and you can tell the plan is spiraling and falling apart. Honestly, I could have spent a few more minutes on them like freaking out and realizing after all this shit, like I wanted to spend a few more minutes on them freaking out, realizing their plan is coming undone
yeah,
and kind of spiraling, and just that said, we didn't get the extra time, but it gets made up for with the super kick. I mean, he just straight drop kicks. He drop kicked
he
his
does.
partner in crime off of a cliff by mistake because he's in such a damn hurry. Which, like, it's amazing because like even then it shows that this guy is both psychotic, like evil, and also just really short-sighted and kind of dumb, and it kind of fits with their overall planning and everything. But just what was he going to tell people then? Like if his plan is just I'm going to kill her again anyway, what was he going to like? What was going to be his way of explaining his way out of this one? Like
Yeah,
obviously he didn't know that people were there watching him do this, but still, like when the body is like at the bottom there, like what was the plan? He just is super impulsive right now.
yeah. Um, I want somebody to do a edit of like her on the Jane at the edge of the cliff in the chair. All of a sudden, Luke King bicycle kicks, comes from the side, and just fucking bicycle kicks her off the edge. Oh man, that'd be so great.
I mean,
Um,
that was basically what he did. That was
yeah.
awesome.
So okay, so let's go into ratings. So we do it out of, as you're aware, five upside down crosses. So for you, Johnny, what would you rate this out of five upside down crosses?
I would give it a solid 4 out of 5 upside down crosses, and I reserve my fives and my 4.5s for like stuff that is like mind blowing to me. And so this wasn't quite there, but I really enjoyed this. Like I'm eager to rewatch it to pick up on maybe clues of Maggie's identity a little
Yeah,
bit sooner and stuff like that. I really thought it was fun. It does have some stuff, like I said, like logic kind of doesn't work on some of the things when you start like the some of the plot falls apart a little bit in terms of, like we talk about, moving the body around and stuff like that. If it was really in the water this whole time, and it has some of those like little nitpicks and certain questions that we had, like Bob reaching for the car
Yeah.
when, like, who is he performing for at that point? Like, there's nobody else there. Some of the other the stuff like that. So if you want to nitpick it, that's the kind of stuff that I think is knocking it down one like little score. But otherwise, 4 upside down crosses out of 5. It's, I think, among the, like, I see why Christopher Lee says this is the best Hammer movie that he was a part of, because I think it legitimately is the best of the Hammer franchise of anything that I think I've seen.
And it's, you got to take into like that how many movies he's been in. He's not even a
Hmm.
major role in this. So you would think if somebody would
Right.
love a movie that he's in, it's probably going to be a movie that he starred in. But he was, like you said, a bit, not maybe not bit, but like a supporting character. And
Yeah.
even in a supporting role, he says this is the best film he's ever been in. That means something, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
For sure.
yeah, for me, I'm gonna agree with you. I'm at 4 upside down crosses here. I really, really loved it. I think the script was really tight. There's a couple things there that were kind of messed up, like you talked about, but I think it was necessary more for like to lead the audience on, and it didn't
Hmm.
make it didn't make us feel stupid or anything like that. It's just like, hey, it was they were doing it for us, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great movie. It's fun, like uh, black and white Hammer. Like it's just really, really just a fun time. The acting was great. You know, was there anything really scary? No, but it was creepy. There were some creepy parts to it that were a lot of fun, like that body down in the water. That's creepy
Yeah.
as shit. And even whenever we would see the body, like in the summer house or in her room or anything like that. So yeah, I really thoroughly enjoyed this film, and I would recommend it to anybody to watch it. So what I also do, Johnny, here is I would ask for a recommendation of a movie that you think basically would be like a great double bill. So if you want to say
Hmm.
like Les Diablo Leagues, for example, you could feel free to say that one. But yeah, that's what I ask.
Perfect.
So Johnny, what would be your recommendation for a good double bill for with this one?
Uh, I mentioned it earlier, the Mario Bava movie, Kill Baby Kill. Um, I think it just gives you a good contrast of, one is the gaslight style of horror, and the other is actually the supernatural. And so I like, when I do the double bill, I like, kind of having a little bit of something, a change up.
Yeah.
But both of them have the same kind of mood, atmosphere, somebody new coming to a place that has carrying dark secrets. There's murders happening, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So that's gonna be my pick.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna do, actually, we talked about it earlier. I can't believe I forgot about it. Gaslight from
Good.
1944, directed by George Cukor and starring Ingrid Bergman and Joseph Cotton and Charles Boyer. That's literally where, for the listeners, that's literally where the term gaslighting comes from. And it's just it's a crime drama mystery, not so much a horror, but it's always straddling the line there. And then
Hmm.
for more like direct, you can do a triple bill with Les Diaboliques that we talked about earlier. So I'd recommend that one a lot. So Johnny, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Johnny and I are going to continue our conversation on the Sunday school sessions, where we're going to talk about his weeb habits and some of the shit he watches. But no, we're going to be talking about some anime horror films. But and so if you want to listen to that, you can support the show, patreon.com/my horror confessional, where you get the video version of the podcast. You get that on Wednesdays, so 2 days early. And then you get the audio podcast a day before. And then you get this free, the Sunday school sessions on Sunday. So, Johnny, if you can let everybody know once again how they could support you and buy your stuff and all that sort of stuff.
Sure. Buy the Spite House or check it out at the library. You can pre-order Devils Kill Devils right now. Follow me online at Compton Writes on all of the platforms, or go to johnnycompton.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Die, Spooky! Die, Spooky!